The sun beat down mercilessly on the rugged cliffs and jagged rocks of the Judean desert. Sand and dust swirled around the narrow pathways, carving shifting patterns in the barren landscape. It was a place where the wind seemed to carry secrets, ancient voices that no one had heard for centuries. For centuries, the caves hidden along these cliffs had remained untouched, their entrances concealed by time, by nature, and perhaps by intention. Few dared to venture here, and fewer still understood that the desert itself was a guardian, keeping its secrets safe from the world. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Dib wandered into one of these caves while searching for a lost goat. His footsteps echoed faintly off the stone walls, bouncing back in uneven rhythms that seemed almost deliberate. And then, as he moved deeper into the shadows, his eyes caught a glimpse of something extraordinary. Clay jars, half buried in dust, their lids sealed tightly with wax. Curiosity overcame caution, and he pried one open. Inside, he discovered a bundle of scrolls, their parchment brittle, their letters written in ink that had survived centuries as if untouched by time itself. The world outside could hardly imagine what was happening in that hidden chamber. These were not ordinary scrolls. They were texts older than many of the empires that had risen and fallen around the Dead Sea. Some were written in Hebrew, others in Aramaic, with symbols and letters that seemed to vibrate with a forgotten rhythm, as though the words themselves were alive. The scrolls were a window into a world long vanished, a world of faith, fear, rebellion, and devotion that had been carefully preserved by unknown hands. News of the discovery spread quickly, though initially with skepticism. Scholars, collectors, and curiosity seekers alike flocked to the region. Each jar that emerged from the desert seemed to whisper the same question: who wrote these scrolls, and why were they hidden? Yet the answers were elusive. Some claimed they belonged to a mysterious sect known as the Essenes. Others believed they were the private records of priests, rebels, or prophets. What became clear almost immediately was that these scrolls contained texts that had not survived anywhere else, passages that could challenge everything known about ancient Jewish history, the origins of the Bible, and perhaps even the roots of early Christianity. The first scrolls examined were fragmented, their edges crumbling at the slightest touch. Scholars handled them with gloves, magnifying glasses, and trembling reverence. Each line was painstakingly transcribed, every symbol cataloged, every anomaly noted. Yet even with all the care in the world, a sense of mystery clung to the texts. There were stories missing, names erased, prophecies that seemed intentionally obscure. And then there was the undeniable aura of secrecy. Some passages appeared to contradict the teachings found in canonical scriptures. Others hinted at hidden knowledge, warnings, or instructions meant to be understood only by a select few. But the desert had more surprises in store. Over the following months, dozens of caves were explored, each yielding its own set of scrolls, some remarkably well-preserved, others nothing more than dust and fragments. The shepherd's accidental discovery had unleashed a chain reaction, exposing a library of forgotten voices from 2 millennia ago. Every scroll was a thread leading back into a world of human passion, zeal for belief, fear of oppression, courage in the face of tyranny, and the desperate hope that knowledge could survive even when empires fell. The Dead Sea itself shimmered in the background, its waters salty and unforgiving. Local legends had always surrounded this region. The idea that it was a place of divine judgment, a threshold between the ordinary and the sacred. Perhaps it was no coincidence that such profound texts lay hidden here. The landscape seemed to guard them, testing those who sought them, demanding patience and endurance, and only revealing its secrets to those willing to listen carefully. Even today, the feeling of standing in those caves is said to be almost otherworldly. The air carries a weight, a silent testimony of lives devoted to recording truth, preserving history, and safeguarding mysteries. And yet, the greatest questions remain unanswered. How many scrolls were hidden in total? How much knowledge has been lost forever? And most tantalizing of all, what was written that was deemed too dangerous or too sacred to survive the canon of history. The world outside had changed since the scrolls were first uncovered, but the desert remained the same, silent, eternal, and patient. Each new generation of scholars and seekers approaches with wonder and trepidation, knowing that the Dead Sea Scrolls are not just ancient texts. They are echoes of humanity's most profound desires, fears, and questions. They are whispers in the desert, waiting to be heard by those willing to understand. And so the story begins, not with kings or battles, but with a young shepherd, a lost goat, and a discovery that would rewrite history. The scrolls were more than relics. They were a mirror, reflecting the complexities of faith, power, and human ambition. And as the jars were carefully opened, as the ink was traced and the parchment unfurled, one truth became undeniable. The Dead Sea Scrolls were never meant to be ordinary. They were meant to be found, yet only by those who could grasp the weight of the secrets they carried. What truths lay hidden in their fragile folds? What knowledge had been deliberately obscured, hidden away from the eyes of the faithful? And, perhaps most hauntingly, what if these forgotten books held the keys to understanding a history that had been carefully edited, shaped, and silenced over the centuries? The answers were waiting, but they would not come easily. In the silent desert, the whispers continued. Long before the desert gave up its secrets, the world was filled with knowledge that vanished almost as soon as it was written. Across civilizations, entire libraries were lost. Fire, war, neglect, or deliberate destruction wiping out centuries of human thought in a single moment. In Alexandria, the great library once held scrolls that chronicled every corner of the known world. Scholars traveled for months, even years, to study its collections, only to witness flames consume thousands of priceless works. We may never know what wisdom perished in those fires, what histories, philosophies, and stories were lost forever. And yet, in the Judean desert, something remarkable happened. For centuries, the desert became a vault, preserving fragments of human civilization that had survived empires, conquests, and a relentless march of time. The Dead Sea Scrolls were not just ancient texts, they were survivors. They were echoes of a world otherwise erased, offering glimpses into religions, communities, and lives that mainstream history had forgotten. Each scroll was a remnant of a library that had never been cataloged, a library whose curators were invisible to the history books. It is staggering to consider what it took for these scrolls to survive. The desert's arid climate played a part, slowing the decay of parchment and ink. But survival alone was not enough. These texts had to be hidden, carefully stored in caves, wrapped in linen, and sealed in clay jars. Someone, or some group, understood the value of what they possessed, and also recognized the danger it represented. For every scroll that survived, there may have been dozens, perhaps hundreds that did not, lost to erosion, to fire, or to human hands that feared their message. History has always been written by those in power. Kings, emperors, priests, and conquerors have dictated what knowledge endures and what knowledge is erased. The scrolls challenge this pattern. They speak of communities that lived on the margins, of sects that defied authority, of beliefs that were deliberately excluded from the accepted canon. These hidden texts are a reminder that the story of humanity is never as neat or complete as textbooks would have us believe. The books that survive are often the ones that someone deemed safe, useful, or obedient. The ones that are lost or hidden often carry a truth too dangerous, too revolutionary, or too inconvenient to be allowed into the light. Across the ancient world, there are whispers of other lost collections, texts that could have changed the way we understand our past. The Library of Nippur in Mesopotamia, filled with clay tablets detailing rituals, astronomy, and law, was largely destroyed. The Mayan codices, once vast repositories of knowledge in the Americas, were almost entirely obliterated during colonial conquests. Even the Greeks and Romans, with their love of philosophy and scholarship, left behind fragments, hints of what had once been a far richer intellectual world. And yet, Among these vanished treasures, the Dead Sea Scrolls endured, a miracle of preservation, circumstance, and perhaps intentional safeguarding. Their survival raises a question that has fascinated scholars for decades. Why these scrolls? What made them worth protecting when so much else was lost? The answer is layered, shrouded in secrecy, and deeply human. The scrolls were not just religious texts. They were records of identity, of hope, and of rebellion. They told the story of a people under occupation, of priests and mystics, and ordinary men and women striving to preserve their faith and their knowledge against the tides of empire. To hide them was to protect the memory of a culture, to ensure that even if the world forgot, a fragment of their vision would endure. Consider the fragility of human history. Entire civilizations have risen and vanished with little trace, leaving behind only fragments, artifacts, or faint mentions in texts written by outsiders. And yet, the scrolls survived. They were not written on stone, like the monuments of kings, but on delicate parchment and papyrus, materials that crumble easily, materials that demand care and foresight to endure. Someone, somewhere, made a conscious decision to preserve these words, to hide them in the unforgiving desert, and to protect them from the destruction that history seemed to bring to all human knowledge. This preservation was not just practical, it was profound. The scrolls serve as a testament to human determination to record, remember, and transmit wisdom. They're fragments of voices that refuse to be silenced. Each line of text, each careful letter, each meticulously stored document is a declaration. We existed. We believed. We sought understanding. And as modern scholars slowly piece together the scrolls, it becomes clear that this lost library was not random. It was curated, organized, and maintained with care, even if the identity of those responsible remains unknown. The Dead Sea Scrolls, in essence, are part of a long tradition of human efforts to fight oblivion. They are reminders that knowledge is fragile, history is vulnerable, and that sometimes the most profound truths are hidden, waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to uncover them. They call to us across millennia, whispering of empires, beliefs, and communities that have disappeared from our records. They challenge us to consider what has been lost and what might still be found, if only we dare to look beyond the obvious, beyond the familiar, into the shadows of history where secrets linger. And so, as we move from the survival of knowledge to the turbulent world in which these scrolls were written, one question hangs in the air. What was happening in Judea that made it necessary to hide these texts so carefully, to risk everything to preserve them? The answers lie not just in the desert, but in the lives of the people who dared to write, hide, and protect them. A people whose story we are only beginning to uncover. 2,000 years ago, Judea was a land of tension, unrest, and expectation. It was a crossroads of empires, a region caught between the ambitions of Rome and the traditions of its own people. The air was thick with fear and hope alike, fear of conquest, of oppression, of losing identity, and hope that somehow, some force, might turn the tide in favor of justice and freedom. This was a society teetering on the edge, and into this turbulent world, the Dead Sea Scrolls were born. Life for ordinary people was a delicate balance between survival and devotion. Families tilled the stony soil along the Jordan Valley. Traders moved goods along ancient routes, and priests performed rituals in the Temple of Jerusalem, the spiritual heart of a nation longing for guidance. But beneath the surface, discontent simmered. Roman authorities demanded taxes, military might enforced obedience, and local rulers often betrayed the very people they claimed to serve. It was a time when loyalty could be deadly, and faith itself became an act of courage. Amid this volatility, religious sects proliferated. The Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, and Essenes each claimed the authority to interpret sacred law, each offering a vision of righteousness. Yet these interpretations were not always in harmony. Tensions between sects often mirrored the larger political struggles, Debates about purity, about law, about what it meant to live a life pleasing to God were more than academic. They were deeply personal, capable of stirring both devotion and violence. And somewhere in the shadows, the Essenes sought seclusion, creating their own community where discipline, ritual, and secrecy governed every aspect of life. The Essenes, in particular, understood the fragility of knowledge. They had witnessed the desecration of sacred spaces, the rewriting of history, and the erasure of dissenting voices. Their response was meticulous. They recorded their beliefs, their rules, their prophecies, and their wisdom onto fragile scrolls, then hid them away in the desert. Each scroll was a lifeline, a message to the future, a defiance of the forces that sought to erase their existence. The desert caves were not merely storage. They were sanctuaries, places where hope was etched in ink and preserved in silence. But it was not just the Essenes who feared for the preservation of knowledge. Ordinary citizens, priests, and scholars all lived under the shadow of uncertainty. The Roman Empire was powerful, organized, and ruthless. Even minor dissent could provoke severe consequences, from imprisonment to execution. In this climate, hiding texts became a necessary act, a protective gesture that ensured ideas, beliefs, and prophecies could survive even if those who wrote them did not. Every scroll carried not only words, but the weight of a civilization's survival instinct. The period was also one of religious ferment and expectation. Messianic ideas flourished in the air, fueled by oppression and longing for deliverance. Prophecies were studied and debated, symbols and codes examined for hidden meaning. Some texts promised redemption, others hinted at judgment. And yet, amid this spiritual intensity, there was caution. Certain messages were considered too radical or dangerous to share openly. They were reserved for those who could understand them, for those deemed capable of bearing the responsibility of knowledge. This duality, hope and fear, revelation and secrecy, defined the world in which the scrolls were created. The scrolls themselves reflect this delicate balance. Some passages offer guidance on daily life, on ritual purity, on communal living. Others hint at esoteric knowledge, prophecies, or interpretations of Scripture that challenge accepted authority. There are warnings embedded in the margins, codes hidden in the text, and repeated motifs that suggest careful thought and intentional secrecy. These were not haphazard writings. They were deliberate, crafted with both devotion and foresight, designed to outlast turmoil, persecution, and time itself. Consider the human element. The scribes who wrote these scrolls were ordinary people, yet they acted with extraordinary courage. They labored in silence, copying texts by candlelight, aware that discovery could mean punishment or death. Each letter they inscribed was an act of defiance, each scroll a testament to resilience. And when the time came, they risked burying their life work in caves, knowing that they might never witness its recovery. The desert would become both protector and witness, silent guardian of a history too fragile to survive otherwise. As the Roman legions advanced, as rebellion and occupation shaped daily life, the scrolls were hidden in the wilderness, and a moment in history was frozen in ink and parchment. This act of preservation was not merely about safeguarding knowledge. It was about safeguarding identity, hope, and faith in a world on the brink. Every scroll is a whisper from the past, an echo of lives lived in uncertainty, and a plea that their story should endure. And yet, even with all this effort, many scrolls were lost, fragmented, or destroyed. Time and human interference took their toll, leaving scholars with only glimpses of what once existed. What remains, however, is enough to transform our understanding of the period, offering a rare and intimate look at a society under stress, a people devoted to faith and the complex interplay of power, religion, and human ambition. As we move forward into the story of the sects, the scribes, and the scrolls themselves, one thing becomes clear. These texts were not merely historical artifacts. They were living documents, carrying the emotions, fears, and hopes of a people striving to survive spiritually and culturally in a world on the edge. And within them lies a question that continues to haunt scholars and seekers alike. If such knowledge was hidden for fear of its power, what truths might it reveal to us now, when the world is ready, or perhaps not ready, to hear them? In the rugged hills near the Dead Sea, a community once lived in deliberate separation from the rest of the world. They were known as the Essenes, though much about them remains shrouded in mystery. To outsiders, they were enigmatic, even frightening, ascetic, disciplined, and seemingly devoted to secrets beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. But to those who belonged to this sect, life was defined by order, ritual, and an almost obsessive pursuit of spiritual purity. Their existence was a world within a world, hidden from empires, authorities, and the prying eyes of history itself. The Essenes were not conquerors, nor were they political leaders. They wielded no armies, collected no taxes, and built no monuments. Instead, they sought to conquer the self, to purify the soul, and to preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Their daily lives were governed by strict rules: communal meals, shared labor, ritual bathing, and meticulous observance of the law. Every action, even the smallest, was a test of discipline. And yet, behind this discipline lay something more profound: a fear that the world outside was corrupt and that its influence could destroy both knowledge and faith if left unchecked. This fear may have driven them to produce and hide the scrolls that would eventually emerge millennia later. Within the caves near Qumran, the Essenes stored not only scriptures but commentaries, prophecies, and teachings too radical for the mainstream religious authorities of the time. Some scrolls interpreted scripture in ways that questioned the existing priesthood. Others predicted events that challenged both political and spiritual hierarchies. To the Essenes, knowledge was power, and power in the wrong hands could corrupt. By hiding their texts, they ensured that their message would survive, even if they themselves were wiped from history. But who were these people, really? Historical records are scarce and often contradictory. Some describe them as monks, some as revolutionaries, and some as mystics with secret rituals. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of communal living: long dormitory-like structures, workshops, refectories, and ritual baths. Yet despite this physical footprint, they remain elusive in the historical record, as if deliberately erased. Even their most intimate beliefs were encoded in their writings, their symbols, and their rules, a shadowy language meant only for those initiated into their order. The Essenes' commitment to secrecy extended beyond doctrine. They maintained strict control over who could enter their community and who could learn their wisdom. Outsiders, even curious scholars or priests from nearby Jerusalem, were rarely permitted to witness their practices. Knowledge was considered sacred and dangerous, a force that could destabilize faith or ignite rebellion if misunderstood. Every scroll hidden in the desert was a calculated measure, a seed planted for the future when a world might be ready, or when someone brave enough might uncover the truth. Their beliefs, though veiled in ritual, reveal a people who wrestled with profound questions: the nature of justice, the meaning of purity, and the anticipation of redemption. Some scrolls describe a coming Messiah. Others envision dualistic struggles between light and darkness, righteousness and corruption. These were not abstract philosophies. They were frameworks for living in a world filled with political oppression, social inequality, and spiritual uncertainty. The Essenes were, in many ways, early philosophers of survival, meticulously recording what they feared the world might forget. Yet there was tension within their practices. The same obsession with purity and secrecy that preserved knowledge also created isolation. Relationships with outsiders were minimal, marriages were regulated, and communication with other Jewish sects was cautious at best. In a world dominated by Roman conquest, internal rebellion, and societal fragmentation, this seclusion was both a shield and a prison. The Essenes chose to live in the shadows, guarding their community, guarding their scrolls, and guarding a vision of truth that the outside world might not yet deserve to see. It is within this context that the scrolls take on even greater significance. They were not merely books, they were lifelines. Each text represents the convergence of faith, intellect, and survival instinct. The Essenes understood that time could destroy people, empires, and cities, but perhaps it could not destroy the written word if preserved carefully. They hid their knowledge in clay jars, buried in caves, where the harsh desert climate would act as both protector and gravekeeper. This act was not passive. It was deliberate, conscious, and almost ritualistic in itself, a final testament to their belief in the enduring power of truth. And yet, even in their meticulous preservation, there is a sense of warning embedded in the scrolls. Certain passages imply that not all knowledge should be revealed, that some messages could destabilize faith or power structures if discovered prematurely. This introduces one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which texts were meant for all, which were meant for a few, and which were deliberately hidden to remain secret forever. The Essenes created a library, but it was a library of shadows, a collection of truths that required discernment and patience to understand. As the centuries passed, the Essenes vanished from history, absorbed or displaced by events beyond their control. Cities fell, revolts were crushed, and empires rose and fell. Yet their scrolls remained, quietly waiting in the desert caves. The survival of these texts is a silent testament to their foresight, discipline, and faith. It is as if the Essenes, long gone, still speak to us from the past, asking us to listen carefully, to question, and to understand the precariousness of knowledge, belief, and power. The story of the Essenes, therefore, is not merely a historical curiosity. It is the story of human determination in the face of uncertainty, of secrecy as a shield, and of faith as a force powerful enough to transcend centuries. Their shadows stretch across history, leaving behind whispers in the desert, whispers that would eventually call the world's attention to the scrolls, to the hidden teachings, and to truths that have the power to challenge everything we think we know about the past. The Dead Sea Scrolls are remarkable not just for what they say, but for what they are. Each fragment, each line, is a testament to the meticulous care, intelligence, and foresight of the people who created them. The scrolls were written on parchment, made from animal skins, carefully prepared to last through decades and, as history proved, millennia. The ink used was resilient, capable of enduring the harsh desert environment without fading. Every scroll, every letter, was an exercise in precision, a deliberate act designed to ensure the survival of knowledge beyond the lifespan of its creators. But the materiality of the scrolls tells its own story. Parchment is fragile, yet it was chosen over more durable alternatives, perhaps because it allowed for portability or because it was considered sacred. The scribes who prepared these texts were craftsmen, scholars, and visionaries, aware that each stroke of the pen could carry immense consequence. They wrote not for immediate recognition, not for fame, but for the distant future, an audience they would never meet, in a time they could not imagine. In every fold, crease, and faded line, there is evidence of devotion, patience, and a profound understanding of impermanence. The jars in which the scrolls were stored were equally deliberate. Clay, sealed with wax, provided protection against moisture, dust, and decay. Some jars were buried deep within cave floors, others hidden in crevices so narrow that only those who knew the landscape could retrieve them. The Essenes, or whoever curated these texts, understood the desert not merely as a backdrop, but as a partner in preservation. The environment, harsh and unforgiving, would keep the scrolls safe from human greed, natural disasters, and the destructive hand of history itself. The caves were vaults. The clay jars were locks. The desert wind was a guard. Even the ink speaks of intention. Made from soot, gum, and water, it adhered to parchment with surprising resilience. In some cases, variations in ink color and thickness suggest different scribes, different times, or perhaps coded emphasis. Every detail mattered, because every detail was a layer of meaning. The scrolls were not just containers of words. They were repositories of knowledge, culture, and belief, encoded in a way that demanded respect, attention, and understanding. Yet for all their care, the scrolls are fragile witnesses to time. Many fragments arrived in scholars' hands in delicate, crumbling pieces, the edges torn, the ink fading. Some are almost invisible to the naked eye, requiring magnification and gentle handling. And yet, within this fragility lies a paradoxical power. The scrolls survived centuries of neglect, political upheaval, and environmental extremes, only to emerge as some of the most significant discoveries in human history. They were written for eternity, hidden in plain sight, and found against all odds. But there is another layer of mystery embedded in these materials: deliberate concealment. Some scrolls appear to be written in codes, obscure phrases, or cryptic language. Others contain duplicate passages, almost as if the scribes were attempting to obscure the most sensitive teachings from casual readers. The very act of writing became an act of concealment, knowledge preserved, yet protected from misuse. The Essenes, or other sectarians, may have understood that some truths were too dangerous, too revolutionary, or too sacred to reveal without careful consideration. The scrolls themselves were vessels of secrecy, their form as meaningful as their content. The creation of a scroll was a ritual in itself. Preparing parchment, mixing ink, and writing the text required hours, days, or even weeks of labor. Errors could mean disaster. One miswritten word could alter meaning or render a passage incomprehensible. Some scrolls show meticulous corrections, overwritten letters, and careful margins where scribes ensured clarity or emphasized importance. The physical creation of a scroll was an embodiment of devotion, patience, and reverence. It was as much an act of faith as the words themselves. And then there is the question of scale. Thousands of scrolls, fragments, and texts were hidden across multiple caves. This was not the work of a single individual or a fleeting impulse. It was a coordinated, sustained effort. Someone understood that knowledge was vulnerable, that history could be cruel, and that these writings might be humanity's only surviving testament to a vanished way of life. The Essenes, or curators of these scrolls, were architects of memory, engineers of history, and guardians of secrets that stretched far beyond their time. As we consider the scrolls' materiality, we begin to grasp their extraordinary significance. They are not merely books. They are time capsules, bridges between worlds, and silent witnesses to human devotion. They survived when empires fell, when wars raged, and when centuries of neglect could have obliterated them completely. The combination of parchment, ink, clay, and desert was a triumph of foresight, a quiet miracle that allowed these texts to speak to us across millennia. And yet, for all their survival, much remains uncertain. Some scrolls were lost to looters. Others remain hidden in caves, yet undiscovered. Some passages are deliberately obscure, and some contain teachings too radical for their time. Each scroll is a fragment of a larger puzzle, a whisper from the past asking us to listen closely, to decipher, and to reflect. The act of hiding and preserving knowledge in clay and parchment was itself a message. This is precious. This is dangerous. Handle it with care. Understand its value. Respect its secrets. The story of the scroll's physical preservation is more than a tale of material survival. It is a story of human determination, ingenuity, and reverence. It reminds us that knowledge is fragile, that history can be lost, and that those who understand the importance of words will go to extraordinary lengths to protect them. The scrolls endure not because they were written in stone or metal, but because someone had the foresight, patience, and courage to preserve them, hidden in the caves, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to listen. And so, as we leave behind the story of materials, ink, and clay, we move closer to understanding the caves themselves, those shadowed spaces where the scrolls waited in silence, the silent guardians of secrets, the ultimate test of patience, endurance, and curiosity. The desert was more than a hiding place. It was a character in this story, shaping the preservation of knowledge, challenging seekers, and demanding that anyone who entered its folds approach with respect, awe, and determination. The cliffs of the Judean desert rise like jagged sentinels, their faces scorched by the sun and scarred by centuries of wind and erosion. Among these rocky heights lie caves, hidden from view, secreted in shadows and crevices that only the most careful observer could detect. These were not ordinary shelters. They were sanctuaries, repositories, and ultimately, the resting places of some of humanity's most extraordinary secrets. The caves whispered to those who entered, not in words, but in the silence of centuries, the hush of sand settling over stone, and the faint echo of lives long gone. For the Essenes, the caves were chosen with intention. They were natural fortresses, difficult to access and easy to defend in an era of turmoil. The harsh terrain ensured that only the determined or the desperate could reach them. Every path, every narrow ledge, every treacherous descent was a test. The caves themselves seemed alive, their shadows shifting with the sun, their floors echoing footsteps that might belong to the past or to the present. To enter a cave was to step into a liminal space, a boundary between the ordinary world and the hidden truths preserved within. The first cave discovered by Muhammad Adib in 1947 was deceptively ordinary. From the outside, it appeared little more than a dark indentation in the cliff, easily overlooked by a casual traveler. But inside, the atmosphere changed. The air was cooler, heavier with the scent of dust and time. Sunlight filtering through the entrance illuminated jars of clay, carefully sealed and partially buried in sand. As the shepherd approached, the walls seemed to close in, the shadows deepened, and the silence pressed against him. In that moment, the cave was more than stone. It was a guardian, a sentinel protecting knowledge from the outside world. Subsequent explorations revealed dozens of similar caves along the cliffs and hillsides. Some were small and narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to crawl through. Others opened into chambers large enough to store hundreds of jars. Many contained debris, signs of previous occupation, and faint inscriptions etched into stone. Archaeologists soon realized that these caves were not random storage spaces. They were carefully selected, engineered by human hands to preserve the scrolls and shield them from the elements and from prying eyes. Each cave was a puzzle, a challenge, a testament to the foresight of the people who used them. The geography of the desert itself played a vital role. Sandstorms could sweep away traces of human activity. Rocks could collapse to seal entrances. The harsh climate preserved the scrolls by keeping moisture at bay. In this sense, the landscape was both protector and accomplice. The Essenes, or whoever hid the scrolls, relied on nature as an ally, understanding that survival depended on more than clay, parchment, or ink. They had to work with the desert, not against it, recognizing that the harshest conditions often provided the most reliable safeguard. But the caves held more than scrolls. They were silent witnesses to human life, devotion, and desperation. Some contained remnants of oil lamps, evidence of long hours spent writing or reading by flickering light. Others had traces of food, suggesting extended periods of habitation. Occasionally, the walls themselves bore faint inscriptions, graffiti, or marks of ritual significance. These details paint a picture of people living deliberately, devotedly, and often in fear. Every action, every hidden passage, every carefully arranged jar was a statement of purpose. The knowledge contained within these caves was sacred, and its survival mattered above all else. The caves also tell a story of risk and courage. To hide scrolls in such inhospitable locations was not easy. Transporting fragile parchment across rocky terrain, carrying jars through narrow passages, and burying them safely required both physical strength and careful planning. Those who undertook this task were committed to a mission larger than themselves, a mission that combined faith, intellect, and survival instinct. Each cave became a stage for human ingenuity, courage, and the determination to preserve truth. Yet, even with such precautions, the caves were vulnerable. Earthquakes, floods, or natural erosion could have destroyed centuries of labor. The desert, while protective, was also indifferent. The survival of these texts was not guaranteed. It was the result of careful planning, human foresight, and perhaps a measure of luck. Every surviving scroll is a testament not only to the knowledge contained within it, but to the extraordinary lengths taken to ensure it could endure the centuries. There's a haunting quality to the caves that goes beyond preservation. Archaeologists and explorers have often reported a sense of being watched, of the past pressing in on the present. The silence is profound, almost communicative, and the very walls seem to hold memory. It is as if the caves themselves bear witness to the choices made by those who lived, wrote, and hid their knowledge there. To enter one is to step into a conversation across millennia, a dialogue between the past and the present that is subtle, powerful, and unforgettable. As we leave the caves behind in our story, it becomes clear that their role was pivotal. Without them, the scrolls would not have survived. Without their protection, centuries of human devotion, intellectual pursuit, and spiritual insight might have been lost forever. The caves are silent sentinels of history, guardians of shadows, and gateways to a world that was nearly forgotten. And now, as we turn to examine the people who first put ink to parchment, the scribes themselves, we begin to understand not just the physical act of writing, but the human courage, devotion, and meticulous care that allowed these secrets to endure in such precarious conditions. In every scroll, in every jar, and in every cave, there is a story of survival, secrecy, and a hope that knowledge could withstand the march of time. Long before the scrolls were hidden in caves, before clay jars sealed them away, there were the scribes, the unseen architects of knowledge. They were the first hands to touch parchment, the first to inscribe ink onto fragile sheets, the first to carry words across time. These were not casual writers. They were meticulous, deliberate, and often deeply devoted. Every stroke, every curve of a letter was imbued with intention. The scrolls were as much a labor of faith as they were of intellect, and the scribes were the guardians of both. Imagine a scribe seated in a small, dimly lit chamber, the glow of an oil lamp flickering against the walls. Around him, parchment sheets lie stacked in careful order. The air smells faintly of ink and resin. He dips his reed pen into the black, thick ink and begins to write. Each line is a meditation, a ritual. Every word carries weight. Every margin is calculated. Mistakes are unacceptable. A single misstep could change meaning, render a prophecy incomprehensible, or undermine the integrity of sacred knowledge. To write was to engage with eternity. The scribes were more than mere copyists. They were interpreters of law, philosophers of faith, and chroniclers of prophecy. Some scrolls contain exegesis, elaborate commentaries that reveal how ancient communities understood Scripture. Others preserve hymns, prayers, or philosophical reflections. The scribes' hands were conduits, translating spiritual and intellectual visions into forms that could survive centuries. Each scroll is a fingerprint of human thought, a direct connection to minds long vanished from the physical world. Time was a constant companion and adversary. Preparing parchment was laborious. Animal skins had to be cleaned, stretched, and treated to create a durable surface. Ink had to be mixed with precision, using soot, water, and binding agents to ensure it adhered properly. The scribe's life was one of patience and precision, of solitary focus, yet intimately connected to the community's spiritual and intellectual life. Every scroll produced was both a personal achievement and a collective act of preservation. It is worth considering the risks these scribes faced. In a world dominated by Roman authority and internal religious conflict, even writing certain texts could be dangerous. Some passages challenged the orthodoxy, others contained radical interpretations of law and prophecy. The act of creating a scroll could be an act of defiance. Scribes often worked in secrecy, aware that discovery might lead to persecution, imprisonment, or death. Every scroll carried not just words, but the courage of those who dared to inscribe them. Evidence of multiple hands in the scrolls tells a story of collaboration and continuity. Some texts show subtle differences in handwriting, inconsistency, or layout. This suggests that scribes may have worked in teams or that texts were copied and recopied over time to preserve their integrity. There is an almost ritualistic devotion in this process. Knowledge was too important to be entrusted to a single person, yet secrecy demanded careful control over who had access. In this tension lies the genius of the scrolls' creation. They were communal, yet highly guarded, expansive, yet protected. The scrolls themselves reveal the scribe's artistry and intellect. Certain texts are densely packed with information, while others leave wide margins, possibly for annotations or coded notes. Some letters are slightly enlarged or emphasized, hinting at meaning beyond the immediate words. Symbols, spacing, and repetitive patterns suggest intentionality, almost as if the scribes encoded layers of meaning to guide future readers. This was not mere transcription. It was careful orchestration, a dialogue across time. Consider the human aspect. These scribes were living in turbulent times. Political unrest, Roman occupation, religious schisms, and social instability surrounded them. Yet, amid this uncertainty, they devoted their lives to a singular purpose: to preserve wisdom, belief, and identity. Their labor was quiet, largely unrecognized, yet it became the cornerstone of a discovery that would astound the modern world. Without these first hands, there would have been no scrolls to uncover, no hidden libraries, and no whispers in the desert. And yet, despite their meticulous care, the scroll's survival required more than skill. The scribes were the first step, but the desert and its caves became the second layer of protection. Every decision they made, the material, the layout, the ink, the folding, was part of a chain designed to resist time, decay, and human interference. In a way, the scrolls were living systems, created with both artistry and strategy, where each layer of preparation increased their chances of enduring. The first hands also connect us intimately to the past. When scholars examine the scrolls, they can trace the rhythm of a scribe's pen, the pressure of their fingers, even subtle corrections or hesitations. It is a human fingerprint across millennia. These traces remind us that history is not abstract. It is made by individuals with thoughts, fears, hopes, and devotion. Each scroll is a testament to human perseverance, a physical manifestation of a desire to leave a mark on a world that was fragile, chaotic, and often unforgiving. And so, as we move from the first hands to the stories contained within the scrolls themselves, we begin to see the interplay between human labor, spiritual devotion, and historical consequence. The scribes did not write for immediate recognition. They wrote for posterity, for a future they could not predict. Their work, combined with the secrecy of the caves and the resilience of materials, allowed their world, their beliefs, and their ideas to survive when so much else was lost. The story of the first hands is a story of courage, discipline, and foresight. It reminds us that history is fragile, and that knowledge often survives only through deliberate, sustained effort. And as we begin to explore the content of the scrolls themselves, the laws, prophecies, hymns, and hidden teachings, we see how these first hands shaped not just documents, but the legacy of a civilization long vanished, yet preserved in ink, parchment, and silence. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not just artifacts, they are voices. Voices that transcend centuries, whispering from the past, daring us to listen. Each line of text carries the imprint of individuals who lived in a world of uncertainty, fear, and faith. These were men and women who grappled with questions as profound and urgent as our own. What is just? What is sacred? And how can truth survive in a world that seems intent on erasing it? Through their writings, they defied oblivion, leaving echoes that reach across millennia to us today. Some scrolls contain laws and instructions, reflecting the meticulous observance of a community determined to live righteously. Others offer prophecies, visions of a world transformed, where justice would prevail and the faithful would be vindicated. Still others are hymns or poems, lyrical meditations on life, death, and the divine. Together, these texts create a tapestry of thought, devotion, and rebellion, revealing a society deeply engaged with questions of morality, destiny, and the human condition. The voices within the scrolls are striking in their intimacy. They speak directly to the reader, often addressing communities in personal terms, offering counsel, admonition, or comfort. In some passages, the author's concern for fairness, ritual, or purity is palpable, almost as if we can hear the pen scratching across parchment, feel the urgency in each carefully chosen word. These are not abstract historical records. They are human voices, alive with emotion, conscience, and conviction. Yet, within these voices lies mystery. Certain texts diverge sharply from what would become canonical scripture. Some passages reinterpret familiar stories. Others introduce entirely new visions of God, law, or messianic expectation. It is as though the scribes and their communities were daring to explore spiritual terrain forbidden or ignored by mainstream authorities. The scrolls preserve debates and ideas that were otherwise silenced, offering us glimpses into paths of thought that history had almost entirely erased. There's also a profound sense of urgency in these writings. Many texts imply that time was short, that danger was imminent, and that preserving knowledge was a matter of survival. This urgency permeates the scrolls, from the meticulous copying of texts to the careful concealment in desert caves. The voices are aware of fragility, not only of human life, but of history itself, and each word carries the weight of responsibility, to be heard, to survive, and to endure. The scrolls also reveal a tension between revelation and secrecy. Some passages appear almost cryptic, written in coded language or using obscure references that only initiated members of the community could fully comprehend. This layered communication suggests that the scrolls were meant to be both seen and hidden, to guide some while protecting knowledge from those deemed unprepared or unworthy. Every word, phrase, and symbol was intentional, a balance between accessibility and concealment. It is fascinating to consider the human stakes behind these voices. Each scroll was created under conditions of threat, political, social, and religious. Communities were often under surveillance. Dissent could provoke lethal consequences, and survival was never guaranteed. Writing, therefore, was an act of courage. To inscribe these words was to stake a claim against oblivion, to assert that truth, knowledge, and faith could endure even in the face of annihilation. The voices in the scrolls are defiant, courageous, and resolute. Moreover, these texts provide an unprecedented glimpse into the daily lives, beliefs, and aspirations of a people often invisible in mainstream history. The scrolls reveal concerns about morality, community cohesion, and spiritual discipline. They show individuals grappling with betrayal, exile, and the challenge of remaining faithful amidst chaos. The voices are not merely spiritual or legalistic. They are profoundly human, imbued with fear, hope, doubt, and longing. Each scroll is a bridge across time, connecting us to hearts and minds that might otherwise have been lost. Some passages even hint at radical visions of society and destiny. They challenge conventional authority, question hierarchies, and explore possibilities that would have been considered dangerous or heretical. The scrolls preserve alternative perspectives on God, law, and leadership, reminding us that history is rarely as singular as it seems. The voices that survived were selected by circumstance, hidden in caves, yet they speak to the diversity, creativity, and intellectual boldness of the human spirit. The poetic and prophetic texts are especially striking. They blend literary sophistication with moral urgency, evoking emotion and reflection in ways that transcend their historical context. Reading them, one senses the presence of individuals striving to make sense of suffering, injustice, and the mysteries of existence. These voices are both personal and universal, inviting readers across millennia to reflect on life, faith, and the endurance of truth. Ultimately, the Dead Sea Scrolls are more than historical documents. They are living conversations. The scribes, prophets, and thinkers who created them reached across time, defying mortality and the erasure of history. Their voices are preserved in ink, parchment, and clay, awaiting discovery, interpretation, and understanding. They remind us that knowledge is fragile, courage is essential, and that even in the shadows of oppression, human beings can create enduring legacies. As we move from the voices of the scrolls to the content of the texts themselves, the hidden books, prophecies, and revelations excluded from canonical scripture, we begin to confront a profound question. What truths did these voices preserve that the wider world was not ready to hear? And in asking this, we step closer to uncovering the secrets that have been buried for centuries, waiting to challenge, illuminate, and transform our understanding of history. Among the hundreds of scrolls hidden in the desert caves, some texts stand out for their audacity, their divergence from accepted teachings, and their near erasure from history. These were books that time, politics, and religious authorities sought to suppress. Texts considered too radical, too heretical, or too subversive for the wider public. Yet, like whispers in the wind, they survived, buried in sand and stone, waiting for discovery. They are the voices of dissent, the alternative histories, the hidden wisdom that challenges everything we thought we knew. These books include reinterpretations of familiar scripture, retellings of stories with surprising twists, and prophecies that never made it into the canonical Bible. They offer perspectives that may have been uncomfortable for mainstream authorities, suggesting alternate understandings of morality, leadership, and divine intervention. In some cases, they even propose figures and events omitted from official history, hinting at knowledge that was deliberately left out of the public record. Each scroll is a fragment of a hidden narrative, a secret history waiting to be pieced together. One of the most fascinating aspects of these texts is the boldness of their ideas. Certain scrolls challenge the role of the priesthood, question established interpretations of the law, or propose spiritual hierarchies unknown to the wider Jewish community. Some describe messianic figures in ways that differ from the accepted tradition, offering visions of redemption and justice that remain enigmatic and, at times, unsettling. These are not casual deviations. They are deliberate, thoughtful, and potentially dangerous revelations that required concealment to survive. The very act of hiding these texts is telling. The Essenes or other curators understood that possession of such knowledge could provoke persecution or even execution. By placing these books in remote caves, they created a sanctuary not just for words, but for ideas that might otherwise have been destroyed. The desert became a vault, the caves became guardians, and the scrolls themselves became symbols of resistance against the erasure of thought. In essence, these texts were written to outlast empires, centuries, and the ambitions of men who sought to control history. Some of these hidden books are striking for their radical reinterpretation of prophecy. They present dualistic visions of the world, contrasting light and darkness, good and evil, in ways that complicate conventional narratives. Certain passages suggest that history is shaped not solely by kings or priests, but by the moral choices of communities and individuals. These texts imply a universe where justice is inevitable, but where it is human action, guided by divine principles, that accelerates or delays its arrival. In this sense, the scrolls are both philosophical and prophetic, urging reflection on the consequences of human conduct. Yet, these texts also reveal the very human fears that motivated their concealment. They expose communities grappling with uncertainty, oppression, and exile. They record debates about purity, law, and loyalty in a world dominated by empires and factional strife. Every hidden passage reflects not only intellectual daring, but also the anxiety of those who created them. To write such words was to risk reprisal. To hide them was to hope for a future in which understanding could survive. In every sense, these books embody both courage and caution. The content of these scrolls also challenges modern assumptions about religious history. They suggest that ancient Judaism was far more diverse and dynamic than the canonical texts alone would indicate. Different sects interpreted the law, the prophets, and messianic expectations in radically different ways. The hidden books remind us that history is rarely monolithic. It is shaped by competing voices, suppressed truths, and forgotten perspectives. In uncovering these texts, we confront the complexity of belief, the politics of memory, and the fragility of human understanding. Archaeologists and scholars have long been captivated by the implications of these hidden texts. They offer tantalizing glimpses into alternate histories, unrecorded traditions, and spiritual wisdom that survived only through meticulous secrecy. Yet they are also fragmented, enigmatic, and incomplete. The challenge of interpretation is immense. Each scroll is a puzzle, each line a potential key to understanding a world that no longer exists. To read them is to engage in an act of both scholarship and imagination, piecing together a narrative that the world once tried to erase. Perhaps most striking is the emotional resonance of these books. They speak of hope in times of despair, of steadfastness in the face of persecution, and of the enduring power of knowledge. They are a reminder that even when empires crumble and authorities attempt to rewrite history, the human spirit can preserve truth in extraordinary ways. Every scroll is a testament to courage, foresight, and the belief that some truths are worth safeguarding at all costs. And so, as we move from the hidden books to the stories of their discovery, one cannot help but marvel at the irony. Texts that were concealed to protect them from destruction are now celebrated for their revelation. The very secrecy that once ensured their survival now amplifies their mystique, transforming them into symbols of the eternal struggle between knowledge and power, concealment and revelation, fear and faith. The story of these erased books reminds us that history is never complete. For every text that survives, countless others may have been lost forever. Yet in the fragments that remain, in the voices preserved against the odds, we find a bridge between the past and the present, a chance to hear the stories that time tried to silence, and to confront the mysteries that continue to challenge our understanding of history, faith, and human ingenuity. It was an ordinary day in 1947 when a young Bedouin shepherd named Mohammed Ed-Dib made a discovery that would change the course of history. As he wandered the rocky cliffs of Qumran in search of a lost goat, he stumbled upon a narrow cave, hidden from view, with its mouth partially concealed by sand and jagged stones. Curiosity drew him inside. The air was cool, dense with dust, and the shadows seemed alive. In the dim light, he saw jars, clay vessels, sealed and weathered by centuries. Their contents would soon astonish the world. Inside the jars were scrolls, carefully rolled and tied, some wrapped in linen for extra protection. The discovery was staggering. Mohammed did not fully understand what he had found, but he sensed its importance. Word of the find spread quickly, and soon archaeologists and scholars arrived, eager to examine the contents of the hidden cave. What they found would rewrite the history of the ancient world and reveal a civilization whose intellectual and spiritual achievements had remained obscured for millennia. The initial reaction to the scrolls was one of awe and disbelief. The sheer number of texts, their age, and the precision with which they had been preserved left experts speechless. These were not casual writings. They were meticulously prepared documents, covering law, prophecy, hymns, and philosophical treatises. Each scroll was a window into the minds and hearts of a people who had lived in the shadows, committed to preserving knowledge against the tides of time and political upheaval. As scholars examined the texts, they quickly realized the significance of the find. Many of the scrolls contained previously unknown works, while others were ancient copies of known scriptures, some dating back to the 3rd century BCE. The implications were enormous. These documents offered insight into religious practices, societal structures, and spiritual beliefs that had long been hidden. They were both confirmations of certain traditions and revelations of ideas that had been excluded or forgotten. The discovery also brought immediate challenges. The scrolls were fragile, fragmented, and in some cases, barely legible. Handling them required extreme care, and scholars had to develop methods to preserve, restore, and study them without causing further damage. Every piece was a puzzle, a fragment of a much larger story. The work was painstaking, often taking months or even years to decipher individual passages. But the reward was unparalleled, a direct connection to the thoughts, hopes, and fears of a vanished community. Even more remarkable was the range of content. Some scrolls contained meticulous copies of canonical texts, demonstrating how scripture was preserved and transmitted over centuries. Others included commentaries, apocalyptic visions, and writings that hinted at alternative interpretations of law and prophecy. There were hymns and poems that revealed deep spirituality, alongside cryptic writings that scholars still struggle to interpret. Each scroll added a new layer of complexity to our understanding of the ancient world, challenging assumptions and sparking intense debate. The story of discovery was also human. The Bedouin shepherds, initially unsure of the value of what they had found, became inadvertent participants in one of the greatest archaeological revelations of the 20th century. Scholars, eager but cautious, navigated political tensions, logistical challenges, and the fragile nature of the texts themselves. The desert, which had protected the scrolls for centuries, now became a stage for collaboration, negotiation, and the careful unraveling of ancient secrets. Among the first to examine the scrolls were experts who recognized the importance of every fragment. They marveled at the sophistication of the scribes, the precision of the ink, and the durability of the parchment. They noticed patterns, repetitions, and anomalies that hinted at layers of meaning beyond the obvious. Every jar, every fragment, was a clue, a message sent across centuries by hands that had long since vanished. Scholars realized that they were not merely studying texts. They were engaging with the thoughts and beliefs of individuals who had defied history itself. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls ignited a global fascination. Newspapers, academic journals, and even governments became invested in the implications. Questions abounded. Who wrote these texts? Why were they hidden? What did they reveal about the origins of Scripture, the diversity of ancient Judaism, and the spiritual life of the period? The scrolls challenged long-held assumptions and promised to deepen our understanding of history in ways few could have anticipated. Yet, amid the excitement, there was also mystery. Not all scrolls were immediately understood. Some contained cryptic symbols or passages that seemed intentionally obscure. Others appeared incomplete, with missing fragments that left gaps in narrative or doctrine. The very nature of the desert's concealment meant that parts of history remained elusive, teasing scholars with the promise of revelations yet to come. In every sense, discovery was only the beginning. As the world learned of Muhammad's cave and the treasure it held, a new chapter of exploration began. More caves were identified, more jars uncovered, and more scrolls brought to light. The desert revealed itself as both a guardian and a storyteller, protecting knowledge for centuries and now daring humanity to interpret it. The discovery was not merely an archaeological triumph. It was an awakening, a chance to hear voices from a time long past, to witness the courage, devotion, and vision of a people who had labored in shadows to preserve their truth. And so, the story of the scroll's discovery is not just a tale of archaeology. It is a story of human curiosity, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. It reminds us that history is often hidden, waiting for those willing to seek it, and that the desert, silent and unforgiving, can become a bridge between past and present, secrecy and revelation, shadow and light. Once the Dead Sea Scrolls emerged from the shadows of the Judean desert, a new kind of guardianship began. not in caves or clay jars, but in the hands of scholars. These men and women were entrusted with deciphering the texts, preserving their delicate fragments, and making sense of centuries-old secrets that had survived wars, erosion, and the ambitions of empires. Yet even among experts, the scrolls inspired awe, uncertainty, and controversy, for they contained knowledge that could challenge long-held beliefs and ignite debates that resonated far beyond academia. The scholars approached the scrolls with reverence. Each fragment was examined with magnifying lenses, gentle brushes, and painstaking care. They traced the shapes of letters, noted variations in handwriting, and cataloged fragments with meticulous precision. The work was slow, deliberate, and deeply immersive. To handle a scroll was to touch a piece of history, to connect with voices that had been silent for 2,000 years. Every inked line was a bridge between past and present, a whisper of thought preserved through generations. But secrecy remained a key part of the story. Initially, only a select group of scholars had access to the scrolls. Political tensions, scholarly rivalry, and concerns over the implications of the texts meant that large portions of the world were excluded from seeing these discoveries firsthand. Some fragments remained in storage for decades, inaccessible to most researchers. The scrolls themselves, once hidden by desert caves, were now hidden in libraries, laboratories, and private collections, continuing a tradition of selective revelation. The tension between knowledge and secrecy fueled speculation. What if some passages contained truths considered too dangerous, too radical, or too controversial for general consumption? Rumors circulated of texts challenging the foundations of Scripture, reinterpreting messianic expectations, or revealing alternate spiritual hierarchies. The very act of controlling access to the scrolls created intrigue, transforming the academic pursuit into a quiet drama of power, authority, and intellectual responsibility. Scholars were no longer merely interpreters. They were custodians of secrets that had survived millennia. Collaboration among scholars was both necessary and fraught. Linguists, historians, theologians, and archaeologists from around the world joined forces to translate the ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek texts. Each expert brought a unique perspective, yet differences in interpretation often led to heated debates. One fragment might be read as a prophetic warning by one scholar, while another might see it as a moral allegory. The scrolls demanded humility, patience, and a willingness to accept that understanding was provisional, always evolving as new fragments emerged or new insights were gained. Some of the most compelling discoveries came from fragments that seemed obscure at first glance. Tiny pieces, sometimes smaller than a fingernail, contained cryptic phrases or unfamiliar names. Scholars had to piece these fragments together like an enormous jigsaw puzzle, matching handwriting, ink, and linguistic style to reconstruct entire passages. It was a painstaking process, but one that yielded astonishing revelations. Previously unknown hymns, lost laws, and alternative interpretations of canonical texts. Each discovery deepened the mystery, suggesting that the scrolls held even more secrets than anyone could have imagined. The human dimension of scholarship added another layer of intrigue. Rivalries, personal ambitions, and differing philosophical perspectives shaped access, interpretation, and publication. Some scholars guarded their discoveries closely, while others were driven by the desire to share knowledge with the world. The scrolls became both a source of intellectual enlightenment and a catalyst for tension, demonstrating how the pursuit of truth can be as complex as the secrets it seeks to uncover. Beyond academic debates, the scrolls raised profound questions about faith, history, and authority. They challenged conventional understandings of religious development, suggesting that ancient Judaism was far more diverse than previously thought. They hinted at suppressed or forgotten traditions and offered new perspectives on morality, law, and spiritual practice. For believers, historians, and the curious alike, the scrolls were not merely artifacts. They were living evidence that the past had voices capable of speaking to the present. Even the act of publishing the scrolls was dramatic. Early editions were slow to appear, and when they did, interpretations were often contested. Some texts were sensationalized in popular media, while others remained confined to scholarly journals, reinforcing the sense of mystery. Readers around the world marveled at the possibility that hidden knowledge from ancient times had survived intact, while academics debated the ethical and historical implications of releasing such information. The scrolls, once hidden in caves, had become catalysts for intellectual and spiritual exploration on a global scale. Through it all, one theme persisted. The Dead Sea Scrolls were more than texts. They were a testament to human curiosity, devotion, and the determination to preserve knowledge. The scribes who created them, the communities that safeguarded them, and the scholars who now interpret them are all connected by a common thread, a commitment to ensuring that voices from the past are not lost, even when history conspires to silence them. Each fragment, each careful translation, continues this chain, allowing the hidden words to endure and speak across centuries. And so, as we move from the scholars to the scrolls' most provocative contents, the books and passages deliberately excluded from canonical scripture, we begin to confront questions that are as unsettling as they are profound. What do these hidden texts reveal about the nature of belief, the limits of authority, and the stories that history seeks to erase? In examining these secrets, we step closer to the heart of the scrolls' enduring mystery, the delicate balance between revelation and concealment, past and present, faith and knowledge. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls lie passages that seem to push beyond the boundaries of conventional scripture, texts that hint at forbidden truths and reinterpretations that centuries of orthodoxy might have deemed too dangerous to preserve openly. These fragments are not merely historical curiosities. They are windows into minds unafraid to question, challenge, and reimagine. Each hidden passage offers tantalizing glimpses of alternative teachings, interpretations of law, and visions of divinity that were carefully concealed, sometimes in cryptic language, to protect both the message and its messenger. Some of the most startling discoveries concern laws and rituals. While certain scrolls meticulously preserve familiar regulations, others introduce subtle deviations, rules that suggest different priorities, alternative hierarchies, or moral interpretations that diverge from canonical texts. These variations may have reflected local practices, dissenting opinions, or radical interpretations that were deemed too controversial for the broader Jewish community. The mere existence of such differences challenges the idea of a uniform religious tradition and reveals a landscape of spiritual diversity far more complex than previously imagined. Then there are prophetic writings that seem deliberately obscure, passages that tantalize without fully explaining. Some describe messianic figures in ways that contradict mainstream scripture. Others suggest apocalyptic scenarios that were never widely circulated. Scholars debate whether these passages were intended for public reading or if they were encoded for the initiated, a kind of spiritual map accessible only to those who understood the symbolism, context, and philosophy behind the words. Every line feels deliberate, calculated, and purposeful, as if the scribes anticipated the danger of exposure and acted to shield their audience from repercussions. The language of secrecy in the scrolls is striking. Some phrases are repetitive, almost incantory, possibly designed to reinforce key concepts while simultaneously obscuring deeper meanings. Margins sometimes contain cryptic annotations, symbols, or corrections that suggest another layer of hidden knowledge. It is as if the scrolls operate on multiple levels, one for the uninitiated, one for those trained in the teachings of the community, and perhaps one for posterity to be discovered centuries later when the world might be ready to understand. Many scholars argue that these hidden passages are more than historical footnotes. They are challenges to authority, both ancient and modern. By preserving alternative interpretations, the scribes created a subtle critique of dominant religious hierarchies, questioning who has the right to define orthodoxy and what constitutes true knowledge. The scrolls suggest that belief is not monolithic. It is contested, debated, and evolving. These texts bear witness to dissent, intellectual bravery, and the courage to document ideas that could imperil the author. Some scrolls hint at social and political ideas that were revolutionary for their time. They address issues of justice, equality, and the moral responsibilities of leaders, often juxtaposing divine law with human action. In doing so, the text suggests that the scribes were not merely concerned with ritual compliance, but with the ethical and spiritual integrity of their communities. Hidden passages, therefore, are not abstract or esoteric. They're profoundly human, reflecting concern for fairness, accountability, and the consequences of collective choices. There are also enigmatic references to mystical practices and philosophical speculation. Certain texts explore the nature of the soul, the structure of the universe, and the relationship between humanity and the divine. These passages were likely considered dangerous or heretical because they ventured beyond accepted theological frameworks. Their concealment suggests a delicate balance. The scribes wanted to preserve these insights, yet they understood that exposure could provoke conflict, misunderstanding, or persecution. Perhaps most compelling is the emotional weight carried by these hidden truths. They speak of communities living under threat, of individuals striving to understand divine will, and of thinkers determined to preserve knowledge against overwhelming odds. The risk and care involved in creating these passages, writing them, encoding them, and hiding them in desert caves reflect a profound awareness of history's fragility and the enduring power of ideas. These texts are more than words. They are testimonies of courage, intellect, and spiritual devotion. The discovery of these forbidden passages has forced historians and theologians to reconsider the narrative of religious history. They remind us that what survives is often what was protected, not necessarily what was universally accepted. Knowledge that is hidden can be as transformative as knowledge that is celebrated. In some cases, it challenges assumptions, provokes reflection, and inspires reinterpretation of events, beliefs, and doctrines that have long been considered settled. As we examine these texts, it becomes evident that the Dead Sea Scrolls are not merely ancient manuscripts. They are living puzzles, deliberately layered with meaning, requiring careful study and discernment. Each hidden passage invites inquiry, reflection, and debate, urging modern readers to question what they know, to recognize the limits of historical understanding, and to appreciate the extraordinary foresight of the scribes who ensured that even the most dangerous ideas might survive. And so, as we move from the scrolls themselves to the historical impact of their revelations, we begin to see how these hidden texts have reshaped modern understanding of Scripture, faith, and the diversity of thought in the ancient world. The forbidden truths preserved in the desert caves are not just academic curiosities. They are challenges to perception, tests of curiosity, and reminders that history is often more intricate, contested, and mysterious than it first appears. The Dead Sea Scrolls do more than preserve ancient writings. They cast a long, enigmatic shadow over the very foundations of the biblical canon. Within the caves of Qumran lie texts that were ultimately excluded from what would become the accepted scriptures, books that survived by chance, secrecy, and meticulous care. These are not marginal curiosities. They are reminders that history is selective, that the stories handed down to us are shaped by choices, power, and circumstance. The scrolls whisper questions that echo through time. What was preserved, what was erased, and why? Some texts mirror known scriptures, yet with subtle variations that hint at interpretive debates lost to history. A familiar story may contain new names, reimagined roles, or moral emphasis that challenges conventional understanding. These differences are not mere editorial errors. They reflect alternative traditions, competing theologies, and communities striving to reconcile faith with lived reality. In these shadows of the canon, we glimpse a world where Scripture was alive, contested, and fluid, far from the fixed and authoritative collections we accept today. Other scrolls preserve writings entirely absent from the Bible, works that suggest spiritual visions and legal interpretations once debated openly but later suppressed. Some propose alternate messianic expectations, reinterpret the law, or explore esoteric philosophy that challenges orthodoxy. These are books that might have been celebrated, feared, or condemned in their own time. That they survived in hidden caves is testimony to human foresight, the courage of scribes, and the precariousness of knowledge. In their concealment, these texts became both relics and rebels, defying centuries of historical editing. The shadow they cast is profound. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal that the canon we know was neither inevitable nor uncontested. Debates raged over which texts were authoritative, which interpretations were permissible, and which voices could survive. Certain passages, preserved in Qumran caves, suggest that entire communities once embraced perspectives that were ultimately marginalized or silenced. The scrolls are evidence that Scripture is not just divine inspiration, but also human negotiation, a product of politics, belief, and survival. Reading these texts, one begins to appreciate the complexity of religious authority in the ancient world. Different sects interpreted the law, prophecy, and ritual in distinct ways. Some scrolls stress ritual purity, others emphasize ethical behavior. Some prophesy apocalyptic judgment, others contemplate the nature of divine justice. These divergent views illustrate that ancient Judaism, and by extension the roots of Christianity, was not monolithic. The shadow of the canon is a reminder that what was accepted as sacred is the outcome of selection, compromise, and often suppression. There's also an emotional dimension to this shadow. Imagine the tension and fear of communities whose interpretations were rejected, whose voices were silenced, whose sacred texts were hidden in caves to avoid destruction. Every scroll speaks of devotion under threat, of ideas protected at the cost of exposure, and of knowledge preserved for a future that may or may not arrive. The shadows of the canon are not just intellectual. They are human, reflecting courage, hope, and the anxiety of those whose work might never be seen. Some scrolls even challenge the spiritual hierarchy itself. Passages suggest alternative messianic roles, reinterpret divine judgment, or propose rituals unknown to mainstream traditions. These texts imply that the official canon reflects choices that may have been political as well as theological. Power, authority, and survival shaped the scriptures that ultimately prevailed. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that history is written not only by those who create, but also by those who decide what is worthy of preservation. The very survival of the excluded texts is remarkable. They endured wars, natural decay, and centuries of neglect because of deliberate action by those who hid them. The caves, the jars, the careful wrapping of parchment, every precaution ensured that these works could outlast human intervention. Yet, they also endured accidental discovery, revealing secrets that challenge our understanding of ancient faith. In this sense, the shadow of the canon is both a story of concealment and revelation, protection and exposure, secrecy and eventual illumination. Scholars studying the scrolls face profound questions. How much of religious history has been lost? How do we reconcile the voices preserved with those erased? What truths lie in texts that were deliberately excluded? And what do they reveal about the diversity, creativity, and struggles of ancient communities? The shadows of the canon invite reflection on the limits of authority and the courage required to preserve knowledge that authorities might have deemed unacceptable. Ultimately, these hidden books illuminate not only the past, but the human condition. They remind us that belief is contested, knowledge is fragile, and history is selective. The shadows of the canon teach humility. The stories we inherit are shaped by survival as much as by truth, and what is hidden may hold profound significance for understanding the evolution of faith, morality, and culture. As we transition from the shadows of the canon to the scrolls' radical reinterpretations of prophecy and law, we begin to see a community daring to imagine alternatives, questioning authority, and documenting visions that were meant to survive in secrecy. The discoveries preserved in Qumran are not just relics. They are provocations, invitations to reconsider what we know and to confront the hidden possibilities within history itself. Among the most compelling revelations of the Dead Sea Scrolls are the radical reinterpretations of prophecy, texts that challenge conventional understandings and push the boundaries of what ancient communities believed about destiny, divine justice, and the coming of a messianic figure. These scrolls do not merely repeat familiar predictions. They recast them, offering alternative visions that diverge sharply from the canonical scriptures. In these writings, prophecy is not fixed, but dynamic, alive with debate, speculation, and daring imagination. The scrolls suggest that the future was never considered inevitable. Some passages depict multiple possible outcomes, contingent upon human behavior, ethical choices, or communal fidelity. Unlike the linear, authoritative prophecies of canonical texts, these writings convey a sense of negotiation between divine will and human agency. They reveal a worldview in which people are active participants in shaping destiny, and where history is a dialogue between heaven and earth rather than a predetermined narrative. Some prophecies are strikingly apocalyptic, describing cosmic upheavals, moral reckoning, and societal transformation. Yet unlike the familiar apocalyptic imagery of the Bible, these texts often emphasize the ethical responsibilities of individuals and communities. Catastrophe is not merely punishment from above. It is also the natural consequence of human action or inaction. In this sense, the scrolls combine spiritual vision with social commentary, offering guidance that is simultaneously mystical and practical. Radical reinterpretation is also evident in messianic expectation. Certain scrolls portray multiple messianic figures or suggest alternative roles for the Anointed One. Rather than a single savior, some texts envision a complex interplay of leaders, priests, and prophets, each with specific responsibilities in guiding and preserving the community. These passages challenge assumptions about monolithic messianic expectation and underscore the diversity of thought within Second Temple Judaism. The prophetic texts also contain surprising linguistic and symbolic innovations. Scribes employ metaphor, repetition, and coded references to convey layers of meaning, making the scrolls both enigmatic and poetic. Certain phrases are deliberately ambiguous, leaving room for interpretation, reflection, and debate. This stylistic choice suggests that prophecy was seen not as an absolute pronouncement, but as a living dialogue, a message meant to provoke thought, ethical reflection, and spiritual preparation. Some scholars argue that these reinterpreted prophecies were intentionally radical, designed to challenge established authorities. By presenting alternative visions of justice, leadership, and divine intervention, the scrolls offered a critique of both religious and political structures. They remind us that prophecy was not only a spiritual exercise, but also a social tool, a way of envisioning justice, warning of consequences, and inspiring communities to act ethically in turbulent times. The scrolls also reveal a keen awareness of historical contingency. Many prophecies reference specific events, political pressures, and social tensions, linking divine expectation to real-world challenges. In this way, the texts are simultaneously visionary and grounded, offering both cosmic insight and practical guidance. They testify to a world in which faith, ethics, and survival were intertwined, where prophecy was inseparable from the lived experience of communities struggling under occupation, exile, and internal discord. The audacity of these scrolls lies not only in their reinterpretation of prophecy, but also in their preservation of forbidden or suppressed ideas. By hiding these texts in caves, the scribes ensured that radical visions could survive even when authorities sought to suppress them. These passages, once at risk of obliteration, became timeless challenges to orthodoxy, demonstrating that the future is not dictated solely by power, but also by courage, intellect, and vision. Emotionally, the scrolls' prophetic texts resonate with urgency and hope. They are not merely academic artifacts. They are pleas, exhortations, and reflections on human responsibility. They convey a sense of ethical seriousness, a reminder that the choices of individuals and communities have consequences that echo through time. The prophecies preserved in Qumran are simultaneously warnings and invitations, urging readers to confront the moral and spiritual dimensions of existence. Ultimately, these rewritten prophecies connect directly to the larger story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They illustrate the boldness, foresight, and human courage that permeates the entire corpus. The scribes were not passive recorders. They were visionaries, interpreters, and sometimes dissenters, willing to challenge established norms while safeguarding their work for posterity. In doing so, they created texts that continue to inspire, provoke, and illuminate, voices from the past speaking directly to the present. As we move from the radical prophecies to the scrolls, laws, and ethical instructions, we begin to see a community that did not merely record the divine. They engaged with it, interpreted it, and sought to apply its principles in complex, real-world contexts. These reinterpretations remind us that faith, law, and morality are living, evolving endeavors, and that hidden wisdom can survive even under threat, waiting for discovery to challenge, inform, and transform our understanding. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of the most striking texts are the legal writings, rules, ordinances, and detailed instructions for daily life that reveal a community grappling not only with spiritual devotion, but also with the delicate balance of authority, morality, and human responsibility. These laws are meticulous, sometimes severe, yet always imbued with a profound sense of purpose. They reveal a society determined to live in accordance with what they believe to be divine will, even when that will diverge from mainstream norms. The Qumran laws are unique in both form and intent. They govern ritual purity, communal obligations, and ethical behavior, often with precision that suggests the community's founders were deeply concerned with maintaining cohesion and spiritual integrity. Yet hidden within these rules are passages that subtly challenge established religious authorities. Certain directives reinterpret priestly power, question the legitimacy of leadership, or propose alternative hierarchies of spiritual authority. These texts imply that law was not merely a static set of rules, but a living instrument through which communities could assert autonomy and uphold ethical standards. Some laws reflect practical concerns, such as rules about water purity, dietary observances, and the conduct of communal meals. Others are more radical, addressing issues of justice, leadership accountability, and the treatment of outsiders or dissenters. These legal texts suggest that the Qumran community saw themselves not as passive adherents to imposed law, but as active participants in interpreting divine expectations. The act of writing and preserving these laws was itself an assertion of agency, a claim to authority grounded in meticulous understanding and ethical commitment. There are also passages that reveal a tension between inclusivity and exclusivity. Certain regulations clearly demarcate community boundaries, specifying who may enter, who may participate in rituals, and who must be excluded. At the same time, other passages emphasize ethical obligations that transcend communal identity, suggesting a moral framework with universal implications. This duality, protecting the group while advocating justice, reflect a nuanced understanding of power, morality, and human responsibility. The scroll's legal texts also shed light on the dangers of authority. By codifying both spiritual and civil rules, the Qumran community was able to create a structure that resisted corruption and maintained cohesion in times of uncertainty. Yet, these laws were not intended as a tool of oppression. Rather, they emphasized accountability. Leaders, priests, and members alike were held to exacting standards. This approach reveals a community deeply aware of the human propensity for misuse of power and the ethical necessity of restraint and integrity. Radical reinterpretations emerge in areas that overlap with canonical law. Some passages revise familiar commandments, while others offer commentary that critiques how the law had been applied elsewhere. In this sense, the Qumran legal texts are revolutionary. They preserve dissenting interpretations, alternative rituals, and moral reasoning that challenge the assumptions of religious authorities. They suggest that the scribes and community leaders were engaged in ongoing debate with the broader religious world, carefully documenting their perspective while remaining hidden from potential censors. The human dimension of these laws is striking. Reading them, one senses the care, anxiety, and devotion of the scribes. Every word was deliberate, every injunction purposeful, crafted to guide a community living under external pressures, political, social, and religious. The laws are reflections of lived experience, not merely abstract ideals. They reveal concerns about fairness, justice, obedience, and ethical conduct in a world where the stakes were often life and death. These legal scrolls also highlight the community's foresight. By codifying rules and interpretations, they ensured continuity of belief and practice across generations. Even when exiled, persecuted, or fragmented, their ethical and ritual framework could survive. In essence, these laws are both practical manuals and philosophical treatises, offering guidance on how to live faithfully in uncertain times. They embody the wisdom of a people determined that their understanding of divine law would endure, even if the wider world rejected it. Emotionally, the laws resonate with tension, courage, and conviction. They remind us that devotion often involves sacrifice, vigilance, and careful stewardship of knowledge. They speak to the human desire for structure and meaning, but also to the courage required to assert a moral vision in defiance of prevailing authority. Each regulation, each commentary, is a testament to both human diligence and the audacity to preserve knowledge that could have provoked hostility. Ultimately, the Qumran legal texts are more than rules. They're statements of identity, defiance, and ethical aspiration. They demonstrate that law, when intertwined with conscience, spirituality, and intellectual rigor, can become a tool of empowerment rather than mere control. These laws are voices of the past that continue to speak across centuries, reminding us that ethical reflection, accountability, and courage are timeless imperatives. As we move from laws to the scrolls, hidden hymns, poems, and meditations, we begin to see the community's inner life, its spiritual struggles, hopes, and expressions of faith. Here, in song and prayer, we encounter the human heart of Qumran, a people striving to connect with the divine, to preserve their vision, and to endure despite history's trials. Beyond laws and prophecies, the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve a rich tapestry of hymns, poems, and meditative texts, words sung, recited, and contemplated by a community striving to connect with the divine amidst uncertainty, exile, and threat. These writings reveal the inner life of Qumran, a spiritual landscape hidden from the world, where devotion, fear, hope, and awe converge in a delicate dance. They are songs from the shadows, voices that speak across centuries, conveying emotion as much as doctrine. The hymns are striking for their lyrical beauty, their structure, and their devotion. Many resemble psalms, expressing praise, longing, and reverence. Others are more enigmatic, filled with symbolic language, metaphors, and repetitive refrains that suggest layered meanings. They are not merely devotional. They are expressions of identity, affirmations of community, and meditations on human and divine relationships. Reading these songs, one senses the heartbeat of a people committed to spiritual perseverance despite isolation and external pressures. The content of the hymns ranges from the celebratory to the haunting. Some honor the majesty of God, recount creation, or praise the virtues of the righteous. Others grapple with fear, uncertainty, and the presence of evil in the world. Certain poems reflect moral struggle, depicting a battle between obedience and temptation, between communal responsibility and individual doubt. The spiritual tension embedded in these writings is palpable, offering a glimpse into the psychological and emotional life of the scribes and their community. What makes these hymns particularly compelling is their depth of symbolism. Imagery of light and darkness, purity and corruption, heaven and earth permeates the texts. Repetitive phrases often carry hidden significance, perhaps understood only by those trained in the community's teachings. These hymns function as both spiritual exercise and coded wisdom, reinforcing doctrine, cultivating discipline, and preserving alternative perspectives that might have been censored elsewhere. In the dim caves of Qumran, every line was an act of devotion and a message to the future. The poetic texts also reveal the community's understanding of time and destiny. Some hymns describe history as a moral narrative, where human choices influence divine outcomes. Others meditate on the soul, the afterlife, or the cosmic order, suggesting philosophical reflection alongside devotional practice. In this sense, the songs are simultaneously prayer, meditation, and instruction, a blend of emotional expression and ethical teaching that mirrors the broader aims of the scrolls. Emotionally, the hymns are profound. They convey longing for justice, fear of oppression, hope for deliverance, and trust in divine guidance. One can almost hear the voices of the scribes echoing in the caves, chanting, reciting, or silently meditating as they navigate a world fraught with danger. Each hymn is a testament to resilience, a spiritual anchor that provided solace and identity when political and social forces threatened to overwhelm the community. Certain poetic texts are apocalyptic in nature, reflecting anticipation of cataclysm and transformation. Yet these are not purely fearful visions. They are imbued with hope, emphasizing moral responsibility and the possibility of redemption. In contrast to prophetic warnings in the legal or apocalyptic scrolls, the hymns often invite contemplation, urging readers and singers to align their hearts with divine principles, to cultivate virtue, and to participate consciously in the unfolding moral order. The structure of the poems is also significant. Many employ repetition, parallelism, and rhythm, creating a musicality that suggests oral performance. The act of chanting or reciting these texts would have reinforced memory, communal identity, and spiritual discipline. The repetitive patterns may also encode philosophical or theological insights, accessible only to those immersed in the community's teachings. The hymns thus serve both as art and as instruction, a dual function that deepens their mystery and impact. These songs from the shadows are not just artifacts. They are intimate glimpses into the lived experience of Qumran. They reveal fear, hope, faith, and doubt, capturing the emotional complexity of a people striving to preserve wisdom, morality, and spiritual clarity in an uncertain world. They remind us that devotion is as much about the heart as it is about law or doctrine, and that human expression, song, poem, meditation, can survive centuries to speak across time. Ultimately, the hymns of Qumran deepen our understanding of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a whole. They illuminate the inner life of the community, complementing legal and prophetic texts, and reveal a holistic vision of spiritual and moral existence. The scrolls are not merely documents. They're living expressions of faith, doubt, courage, and creativity preserved against the odds. Through these songs, the shadows of the desert caves resonate with voices that continue to inspire, challenge, and mystify. As we move from the lyrical hymns to the philosophical and mystical scrolls, we encounter another layer of Qumran's hidden knowledge, texts that explore the nature of the cosmos, the divine, and humanity's place within both. These writings elevate the scrolls from historical documents to timeless reflections on existence itself, offering a bridge between mystery, philosophy, and faith. Beyond law, prophecy, and song, the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal a surprising layer of psychological and philosophical insight, a window into the minds of those who wrote them and the communities they served. These texts explore morality, conscience, and the human capacity for self-reflection, showing that the scribes were not only observers of divine law, but also thinkers deeply attuned to the complexities of human nature. In a quiet desert, hidden from the world, the mind became a landscape as rich and intricate as the parchments themselves. Some scrolls contemplate the nature of thought and intention, emphasizing that inner life is as significant as external action. Obedience to law is inseparable from moral reflection. Ethical living requires awareness, discernment, and integrity. Certain writings urge the faithful to examine themselves rigorously, to confront doubt, temptation, and pride. These passages reveal a psychological sophistication rarely acknowledged in ancient texts, a recognition that humans are moral agents capable of shaping their spiritual destinies through reflection, choice, and discipline. Other texts explore the tension between individual desire and communal responsibility. The Qumran community lived under strict rules, yet the scrolls indicate awareness of personal struggle. One sees repeated exhortations to humility, patience, and restraint, suggesting that spiritual development is not merely a matter of following directives, but of mastering the mind, regulating emotions, and cultivating empathy. In these writings, inner discipline is inseparable from communal cohesion, showing a profound understanding of the interplay between self and society. The scrolls also contain reflections on fear and hope, courage and doubt, revealing the emotional lives of their authors. Certain texts acknowledge despair, exile, and uncertainty, yet they offer guidance for navigating these challenges. In this way, the scrolls function as both philosophical treatises and psychological manuals, blending ethical instruction with emotional insight. Readers can sense the care, wisdom, and empathy of those who compose these passages. Scribes who understood that human survival depends not only on law and ritual, but also on mastery of the mind. Symbolism and allegory are central to these philosophical texts. Metaphors of light and darkness, journey and rest, conflict and harmony recur throughout the writings, offering multiple layers of interpretation. Some passages employ allegorical stories, depicting moral or spiritual struggles as battles, journeys, or cosmic events. These literary techniques invite reflection, allowing readers to engage actively with the text and discover meanings relevant to their own lives. The scrolls, therefore, are interactive, encouraging contemplation and internal dialogue rather than passive reception. Interestingly, some scrolls delve into the limits of human knowledge. They acknowledge uncertainty, the possibility of error, and the mysteries that surpass comprehension. These writings are remarkable for their humility. They recognize that wisdom is iterative, that even the most diligent seeker may fall short of understanding, and that revelation is often partial. In this way, the scrolls embody both intellectual courage and intellectual modesty, creating a framework for exploring complex questions without presuming definitive answers. The psychological and philosophical insights are also ethical in nature. Many passages emphasize justice, integrity, and accountability, linking internal reflection to external action. Thought, emotion, and conduct are intertwined. The health of the mind is inseparable from the health of the community. In this sense, the scrolls anticipate modern understandings of moral psychology, offering guidance that transcends time, culture, and circumstance. Some writings even touch upon the nature of memory, knowledge, and learning. The meticulous preservation of texts, the careful annotations, and the codified rules of interpretation reveal an awareness of cognitive processes and the fragility of knowledge. The scribes understood that memory is selective, that understanding is layered, and that wisdom requires careful cultivation. Their writings reflect not only the preservation of content, but also the methods by which knowledge can be internalized, transmitted, and applied, a remarkably sophisticated perspective for any era. Emotionally, these texts resonate deeply. They reflect the anxieties, hopes, and ambitions of a people living in a precarious world. Exile, political tension, and social isolation are constant pressures, yet the scrolls emphasize resilience, introspection, and courage. One can almost feel the scribes' inner dialogues, their self-questioning, and their commitment to ethical living, preserved in words that continue to speak across 2 millennia. Ultimately, the mysteries of the mind within the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal a humanity often hidden behind law and ritual, They remind us that faith is not only obedience, prophecy is not only prediction, and devotion is not only outward expression. The scrolls challenge readers to explore the inner life, to grapple with ethical and spiritual dilemmas, and to confront the complexities of thought, emotion, and conscience. As we move from the psychological depths to the scrolls' esoteric and mystical texts, we encounter writings that attempt to map the unseen universe, texts that bridge mind, spirit, and cosmos. Here, hidden knowledge reaches its most enigmatic and profound form, blending philosophy, mysticism, and awe in a way that continues to mystify modern scholars. Within the Dead Sea Scrolls, beyond laws, hymns, and prophecies, lie texts that reach toward the cosmic, the mystical, and the ineffable. These writings explore visions of the universe, the nature of divinity, and humanity's place within a grand, often incomprehensible order. Unlike practical laws or ethical instructions, these texts operate on a plane of imagination and speculation, daring to map realities that are invisible yet profoundly influential, both for the scribes who wrote them and the communities who preserved them. Some scrolls describe celestial hierarchies, portraying angelic beings, cosmic forces, and divine order with intricate detail. These visions reveal a universe alive with spiritual agency, where celestial events mirror moral and human realities. Angels act as intermediaries, observers, and sometimes enforcers of divine law. Certain texts suggest that the Qumran community believed these forces were intimately linked to human behavior. Actions, choices, and moral decisions resonate throughout both earthly and heavenly realms. In these passages, the cosmos is not distant abstraction. It is an active participant in human history and morality. Other mystical writings explore time and eternity, offering frameworks in which past, present, and future intertwine. Some prophecies and hymns are layered with temporal symbolism, suggesting that understanding divine will require perception beyond linear time. In these texts, the past is preserved not only in memory, but also in cosmic reflection, and the future is shaped by ethical and spiritual attentiveness. The scrolls invite readers to perceive reality as multidimensional, where human action interacts with celestial design in subtle, profound ways. Some of the most enigmatic texts discuss the nature of divine knowledge itself. Certain passages speculate on the limits of human understanding, the hidden motives of the cosmos, and the mysteries of fate and free will. The scribes acknowledge that the universe contains realms beyond comprehension, that sacred wisdom can be partial or symbolic, and that interpretation requires both intellect and intuition. These writings suggest a humility before the vastness of creation, balanced with a relentless pursuit of insight and understanding. The mystical scrolls also explore ritual, meditation, and spiritual practice as pathways to comprehension. Some texts describe purification, prayer, and contemplation as methods for aligning human consciousness with divine order. The act of writing, reading, and reciting these texts was itself considered a sacred practice, enabling participants to access hidden knowledge, experience spiritual revelation, and cultivate ethical awareness. In this way, the scrolls blur the line between theory and practice, showing that mysticism and daily life were intertwined in deeply personal and communal ways. Symbolism is central to the cosmic vision of these scrolls. Imagery of light and darkness, heaven and earth, rivers, and celestial bodies recurs throughout, often in complex, layered forms. These symbols operate both as teaching tools and as reflections of inner spiritual states, inviting readers to interpret meaning on multiple levels. The texts are puzzles and meditations, designed to challenge, inspire, and illuminate simultaneously. To engage with them is to participate in a dialogue that spans time, culture, and consciousness. Emotionally, these mystical writings evoke awe, fear, wonder, and contemplation. They transport readers from the immediate concerns of survival and morality to the vast expanse of cosmic possibility. Some passages convey divine majesty with such intensity that they elicit both reverence and trembling, while others inspire a quiet reflection on humanity's fragile yet purposeful place in the universe. The scrolls invite the audience to consider existence in its totality, to question assumptions, and to recognize both human limitation and potential. Interestingly, the mystical texts sometimes intertwine with prophecy and law. Celestial visions inform ethical obligations. Cosmic hierarchies parallel community structure. This integration reveals a holistic worldview in which the mystical and the practical are inseparable, and where understanding the universe requires both contemplation and action. The Qumran community's scribes did not separate thought from practice, spirit from society. They saw all aspects of life as interconnected, governed by ethical, spiritual, and cosmic laws. The preservation of these mystical texts is itself remarkable. Hidden in caves, sometimes fragmented or partially damaged, they survived centuries of conflict, environmental degradation, and human oversight. Their survival testifies to the community's foresight and to the enduring power of human curiosity and devotion. These are writings meant not only to instruct, but also to inspire, challenge, and elevate the mind and spirit of anyone who encounters them, even thousands of years later. Ultimately, the mystical and cosmic scrolls deepen the mystery and majesty of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a whole. They demonstrate that the Qumran community was not solely concerned with law or ritual, but with understanding existence itself. In their daring visions, their symbolic language, and their ethical integration, the scrolls reveal a civilization grappling with the ultimate questions. Who are we? What is the nature of the divine? How do human choice, morality, and consciousness intersect with the cosmos? As we move from these cosmic visions to the scrolls' provocative historical implications, we begin to see how these texts challenge assumptions about ancient society, religion, and power. Here, history, philosophy, and spirituality converge, offering revelations that continue to provoke, mystify, and inspire curiosity about the world of 2 millennia ago, and perhaps about our world today. The Dead Sea Scrolls do more than preserve texts. They whisper of history altered by secrecy, power, and human choice. The hidden writings reveal an ancient world where what was recorded and what was deliberately concealed shaped the trajectory of religion, politics, and culture. These scrolls suggest that history, as we know it, is not merely a record of events, but a narrative influenced by the hands of those who wielded authority, by those who dared to challenge it, and by those who preserved knowledge in shadows. Some passages illuminate alternative historical perspectives. They hint at sects, factions, and leaders whose stories were erased or marginalized. Individuals once central to spiritual or political movements appear only in fragments, their significance preserved in texts hidden from view. The scrolls suggest that entire narratives, now considered canonical, were shaped as much by selection and suppression as by divine inspiration. In these hidden texts, we glimpse the contours of a world that might have been remembered differently, where power, faith, and ideology collided in ways rarely recorded by mainstream history. Historical events are often reframed, emphasizing causes, consequences, and motivations obscured elsewhere. Some scrolls describe tensions between communities, rival interpretations of law, or disputed leadership. They reveal conflicts not merely of violence, but of ideas, with scribes documenting the stakes of belief and the consequences of dissent. Through these records, we understand that history was contested, debated, and authored by those with the foresight, or the audacity, to record truths that others might have wished forgotten. The scrolls also suggest the presence of hidden networks, groups operating in secrecy, preserving knowledge, and influencing events behind the scenes. These clandestine communities acted as custodians of wisdom, ensuring survival of texts, traditions, and interpretations that would have been suppressed or destroyed. Their existence implies a parallel history, a layer beneath the official narrative where human ingenuity, courage, and devotion preserve the intangible threads of culture, spirituality, and philosophy. Some texts reveal deliberate manipulation of narrative. Scribes occasionally revise familiar stories, altered genealogies, or highlighted events selectively, emphasizing moral lessons or spiritual truths rather than chronological accuracy. In doing so, they preserve the essence of belief and identity while shaping collective memory. This raises profound questions about authority and authenticity. Who decides what becomes history, and whose voices are silenced in the process? Emotionally, these writings convey tension, anxiety, and determination. The act of recording history under threat requires courage. To preserve dissenting perspectives is an act of both faith and defiance. The scribes were acutely aware of the stakes. Survival, memory, and legacy depended on secrecy, precision, and sometimes deception. The scrolls are testimonies to human resilience, the ability to influence posterity not through force, but through knowledge carefully safeguarded against time and adversaries. These historical revelations also intersect with the scrolls' spiritual and philosophical content. By documenting alternative perspectives, they challenge readers to reconsider assumptions about divine favor, moral authority, and the relationship between human action and sacred destiny. History is presented not as static fact, but as a living dialogue, a story continually rewritten by those courageous enough to record the truth as they understood it, and by those willing to interpret it across generations. Interestingly, some texts hint at suppressed political knowledge. Alliances, conflicts, and rivalries appear in coded language or cryptic references, suggesting that scribes were acutely aware of power dynamics and their implications for the community's survival. These passages offer glimpses into a world where faith and politics were inseparable, where survival required both spiritual devotion and strategic intelligence. The scrolls remind us that history is often a battlefield, fought not only with armies but with ideas, documents, and memory itself. The preservation of these historical threads in hidden caves is remarkable. Fragile parchment, careful concealment, and meticulous annotation allowed knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to endure. The scrolls demonstrate that even under threat, the human drive to preserve memory, to document truth, and to shape understanding is powerful and enduring. They are evidence that history is not only recorded by the victorious or the powerful, but also by those who act quietly, persistently, and with foresight in the shadows. Ultimately, the Dead Sea Scrolls challenge modern assumptions about history. They reveal that what is known is often shaped as much by what is hidden as by what is preserved. They remind us that historical narratives are constructed, and that beneath the familiar stories lie layers of complexity, dissent, and unseen influence. By studying these texts, we confront the reality that history is living, dynamic, and contested, a tapestry woven by both light and shadow. As we move from hidden historical truths to the controversial theories sparked by these discoveries, we encounter debates, speculations, and interpretations that continue to challenge scholars and believers alike. Here, the scrolls intersect with modern curiosity, prompting questions that remain unresolved, provocative, and deeply human. The Dead Sea Scrolls did not merely preserve texts. They uncovered ideas that could, and in some cases did, challenge established authority. Among the writings are passages that suggest alternative interpretations of Scripture, different messianic expectations, and spiritual practices once widely debated but later suppressed. These theories, radical for their time, illuminate the tension between belief, institutional power, and the human desire to control sacred knowledge. The scrolls reveal a hidden struggle over what was allowed to survive and what was buried. Some texts imply that certain messianic figures were once celebrated, debated, or even feared before being excluded from the mainstream narrative. The canonical Bible presents a singular vision, but the scrolls hint at a richer, more complex tapestry of expectation, where there are multiple messianic claimants, each embodying different roles or virtues. Did these alternative figures challenge the emerging orthodoxy, provoking fear or hostility among religious leaders? These possibilities reveal that what the Church canonized was the result of selective choice, and that competing interpretations were often silenced. Other writings reinterpret familiar stories, challenging conventional theology. The scrolls occasionally present moral dilemmas, alternative laws, or visions of justice that diverge from established texts. Some passages even suggest esoteric knowledge, accessible only to a select few, which could radically shift understanding of divinity, morality, or the nature of the universe. Such ideas were dangerous to institutions seeking uniformity and control, for knowledge, even sacred knowledge, is a form of power. The scrolls also highlight debates over ritual and spiritual practice. Certain texts propose approaches to purity, prayer, or communal life that differ from what eventually became orthodox. These variations were not minor. They represent fundamentally different interpretations of divine expectation. To those enforcing orthodoxy, these ideas were subversive, potentially undermining the authority of religious leaders or destabilizing communities dependent on uniform belief. The effort to suppress or marginalize these theories underscores the high stakes involved. Belief, obedience, and legitimacy were all intertwined. Some scholars argue that the Qumran community itself was, in part, a response to such suppression, a group seeking refuge from a religious system that rejected alternative interpretations. By writing, copying, and hiding these texts, they preserved perspectives that might otherwise have vanished. The caves of Qumran became a sanctuary for radical thought, a repository for forbidden knowledge, and a testament to human courage and foresight. The preservation of these writings ensured that centuries later, these suppressed theories could resurface, challenging assumptions and provoking new questions about the past. Emotionally, the danger and secrecy surrounding these texts are palpable. Imagine the fear of discovery, the anxiety of being accused of heresy, and the determination required to safeguard controversial knowledge. Each scroll, jar, and carefully wrapped parchment is a silent act of defiance, a testament to individuals who risked everything to protect truth as they understood it. Theories buried in secrecy speak not only to intellectual curiosity, but also to human bravery, ethical conviction, and the will to endure. The Church's role in shaping orthodoxy adds another layer of intrigue. Decisions about which texts to include in the canon and which to exclude were not made in isolation. Political, social, and theological considerations converged, producing a selective historical narrative. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer glimpses of ideas that were actively excluded, revealing the complexity and, at times, the contentiousness of religious decision-making. They remind us that sacred authority is constructed, maintained, and occasionally challenged, and that what survives in canon is often the result of negotiation, compromise, or suppression. Some passages hint at prophetic reinterpretations that were deliberately omitted from mainstream scripture. They suggest alternate paths, divergent moral teachings, or visions of spiritual leadership that could have changed the course of religious understanding. In preserving these theories, the scrolls become more than historical artifacts. They're instruments of revelation, posing questions about orthodoxy, authority, and the interplay between human interpretation and divine guidance. The controversy surrounding these texts extends to modern scholarship. Since their discovery, debates have erupted over authenticity, interpretation, and implications. Scholars continue to examine the radical potential of these writings, asking how they reshape understanding of early Judaism, messianic expectation, and the origins of Christianity. The theories hidden in Qumran caves provoke curiosity, wonder, and occasionally discomfort, demonstrating that the scrolls are not relics of a distant past. They are living provocations, challenging assumptions, and encouraging inquiry. Ultimately, the scrolls teach a powerful lesson. Knowledge is never neutral. Ideas, whether accepted or suppressed, shape communities, beliefs, and history itself. By uncovering theories the Church tried to bury, The Dead Sea Scrolls invite reflection on authority, interpretation, and the courage required to preserve truth against pressure, orthodoxy, or fear. They remind us that beneath the polished narrative of history, hidden hands have written stories that continue to resonate, provoke, and illuminate. As we move from the hidden theories to the modern rediscovery and scholarly pursuit of the scrolls, we begin to see how these ancient writings continue to influence thought, provoke debate, and challenge our understanding of history, faith, and human curiosity. The legacy of secrecy gives way to revelation, raising questions that remain unresolved and irresistible to this day. The story of the Dead Sea Scrolls does not end with their concealment in desert caves. Their rediscovery in the mid-20th century was a moment that shook the world of scholarship, religion, and history, revealing long-lost texts that had survived millennia in silence. The caves, once silent guardians of hidden knowledge, suddenly became the stage for an unprecedented archaeological and intellectual revelation. Every fragment unearthed was a doorway to mysteries thought lost, a whisper from the past demanding to be heard. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd's accidental discovery ignited a chain reaction. He stumbled upon jars hidden in a dark cave near Qumran, their contents fragile yet astonishing. The scrolls, carefully wrapped and preserved, contained writings both familiar and radically new. Canonical psalms, apocryphal works, sectarian rules, and mystical visions. What emerged was not merely an archive, but a window into a society whose faith, intellect, and spiritual audacity have been obscured by time and politics. The rediscovery was serendipitous, yet would transform our understanding of the ancient world. The initial discovery set off a frenzy among scholars, collectors, and religious authorities. The scrolls' fragmented nature required painstaking reconstruction, yet every piece was a revelation. Some fragments confirmed known texts, while others offered alternative versions, radical reinterpretations, or entirely unknown works. The process of piecing together these parchments became a race against time, deterioration, and human ambition. Each newly restored fragment was a puzzle piece, contributing to a mosaic of a lost civilization that was at once ordinary and extraordinary. Emotionally, the rediscovery was electric. For the first time in 2,000 years, voices long silenced were audible again. Scholars described awe, disbelief, and a sense of spiritual intimacy with the ancient scribes. The scrolls were not mere historical artifacts. They were conversations with people who had lived, thought, doubted, and hoped in a world far removed from ours. Holding a fragment, touching the faded ink, was like brushing against a hidden truth, a secret carefully safeguarded across centuries. The scrolls' rediscovery also ignited controversy and intrigue. Questions of ownership, authenticity, and interpretation arose immediately. Different nations, religious authorities, and academic institutions debated custody, access, and the potential implications of these texts. For decades, portions of the scrolls remained inaccessible to wider scholarship, fueling speculation, secrecy, and, at times, conspiracy. This modern veil of secrecy echoed the ancient one, as if the scrolls' mysteries extended across millennia, challenging each generation to earn their revelation. What is particularly striking is how rediscovery transformed not only academic understanding, but also cultural imagination. The scrolls inspired debate over biblical interpretation, historical accuracy, and the evolution of religious thought. They opened questions about suppressed traditions, alternative prophecies, and the diversity of belief in ancient Judaism. Scholars began to see the ancient world not as monolithic, but as a complex tapestry of communities, ideas, and rivalries, many of which have been hidden from history until these fragile parchments emerged from the shadows. The process of reconstruction required ingenuity and patience. Fragile fragments, sometimes smaller than a thumb, had to be carefully analyzed, photographed, and pieced together with meticulous attention. Linguistic expertise, chemical analysis, and historical cross-referencing were all employed to restore meaning and context. Each scroll revealed patterns of thought, ritual, and symbolism, allowing scholars to reconstruct not just texts, but the worldview and lived experience of Qumran. The rediscovery was an extraordinary intersection of human curiosity, perseverance, and reverence for knowledge. Emotionally, one can imagine the thrill and awe of those first scholars who handled the scrolls. To see a text untouched for 2 millennia, ink still legible, is to touch eternity. Every line was a message, a challenge, a secret shared across centuries. For modern audiences, the rediscovery offers a bridge to the past, an intimate connection to a civilization that wrestled with faith, morality, and cosmic understanding just as we do today. The scrolls speak not only to history, but to human continuity, resilience, and the enduring power of curiosity. The rediscovery also highlighted the fragility of memory and the importance of preservation. Had the scrolls been destroyed, lost, or deteriorated beyond recognition, centuries of alternative history, philosophy, and spiritual reflection might have vanished forever. Their survival reminds us that hidden knowledge can endure, that secrecy can be both protective and revelatory, and that discovery is always a dialogue between past and present. Ultimately, rediscovering the forgotten transforms the Dead Sea Scrolls from relics into living witnesses. They challenge assumptions, ignite curiosity, and reveal that even in the harshest deserts, hidden voices can survive to illuminate, question, and inspire. The scroll's return from obscurity is not just an archaeological triumph. It is a human triumph, a reminder that persistence, courage, and reverence for knowledge can preserve truth across time. As we move from rediscovery to the personal stories of those who risked everything to study, preserve, and interpret the scrolls, we encounter the human drama that accompanies revelation. Scholars, adventurers, and guardians of these texts became part of the narrative, intertwining modern curiosity with ancient mystery, creating a story that bridges 2 millennia and continues to captivate the imagination. The rediscovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls brought the ancient texts into the light, yet the story of the scrolls is not only about what was found. It is also about those who safeguarded, studied, and sometimes guarded these fragile treasures with a vigilance bordering on obsession. From their concealment in the Qumran caves to their journey into modern hands, the scrolls have been protected by a chain of custodians, scholars, and institutions, each acting as both witness and guardian of a profound secret. The first guardians, of course, were the Qumran community itself. They understood the fragility of parchment, the dangers of exposure, and the immense value of the knowledge they preserved. These scribes and leaders took extraordinary measures to hide their texts in caves, ensuring that even if the community fell, the wisdom and insight encoded in the scrolls would endure. Every jar, every careful wrapping, every seal was a testament to foresight and devotion, and to the recognition that knowledge, especially controversial knowledge, must sometimes be shielded from those unprepared to wield it responsibly. Millennia later, the rediscovered scrolls required a new kind of guardianship. Scholars and archaeologists, often under immense pressure, faced the daunting task of preserving fragments that had survived centuries of decay. Every handling was delicate. A single misstep could destroy centuries of history. The guardianship extended beyond physical preservation. It involved interpretation, contextualization, and the ethical responsibility of ensuring that these texts, once hidden, were treated with respect and intellectual rigor. These modern custodians became intermediaries between the past and the present, responsible for unlocking knowledge while protecting its integrity. Emotionally, the role of these guardians was fraught with tension. They bore the weight of responsibility. One mistake could distort history, mislead scholarship, or even provoke cultural or religious controversy. The stakes were immense. Each decision, how to store fragments, which portions to publish, and how to interpret ambiguous passages, was made under the shadow of the scroll's historical, spiritual, and emotional significance. The guardians were not merely academics. They were stewards of a secret that had survived millennia, entrusted to their hands alone. The scrolls' journey also brought them into the complex interplay of politics, religion, and international intrigue. Different nations, institutions, and religious authorities sought access, each with vested interests in controlling, interpreting, or owning the scrolls. Custodians had to navigate this landscape carefully, balancing transparency with protection. In some cases, secrecy was necessary not only to preserve the scrolls physically, but to shield them from exploitation or misrepresentation. The modern guardians, much like their ancient predecessors, understood that knowledge in the wrong hands can be dangerous. Certain scholars became legendary figures in this story. They dedicated decades to painstaking transcription, reconstruction, and analysis, often working in near isolation. Their devotion sometimes bordered on obsession, fueled by a mix of intellectual curiosity, ethical responsibility, and a sense of participating in something almost sacred. These guardians lived with the scrolls, breathing life into texts that had been silent for centuries, and interpreting fragments that could alter our understanding of history, religion, and human thought. The scrolls themselves seemed to demand guardianship. Their fragility, their incomplete nature, and the profound implications of their content created an almost mystical responsibility. Every fragment was a puzzle, a test, a trust. The guardians had to decipher languages, reconstruct missing passages, and discern intent, all while respecting the ancient wisdom encoded in the words. This work required patience, humility, and unwavering focus, a modern echo of the meticulous care that the Qumran scribes had exercised millennia before. Interestingly, the scroll's custodianship also revealed human drama. Rivalries, disputes over interpretation, and debates about access mirrored, in some ways, the struggles encoded in the texts themselves. Guardianship was not only about preservation, it was about negotiation, diplomacy, and sometimes secrecy. The scrolls remained a kind of living entity, shaping the lives, decisions, and careers of those entrusted with them. They were both burden and privilege, mystery and revelation, demanding the utmost respect from those who dare to engage with them. Emotionally, the story of the scroll's guardianship is a testament to human dedication and reverence. It illustrates how knowledge, when intertwined with history, spirituality, and ethical responsibility, transcends time and circumstance. The Qumran community preserve the scrolls in the shadows. Modern guardians protect them in the open, yet the sense of awe, secrecy, and responsibility persists. In both cases, the scrolls inspire respect for the fragility of knowledge and the courage required to safeguard it. Ultimately, the role of these guardians emphasizes that the Dead Sea Scrolls are more than texts. They are living witnesses. They challenge, inspire, and illuminate, but only when they are treated with care, understanding, and humility. From the desert caves to modern libraries and laboratories, the scroll's survival depends on those willing to protect them, to study them, and to honor the profound continuity between past and present. As we move from guardianship to reflection, the final section invites us to consider what these hidden texts, preserved and rediscovered against all odds, mean for humanity today. The scroll's legacy is not merely historical. It is ethical, emotional, and spiritual, prompting us to ask, what if these secrets, once revealed, change not only our understanding of the past, but our vision for the future? As the last fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls are pieced together, the story comes full circle, from the hidden desert caves to modern scholarship, from secrecy to revelation. These texts, preserved against the relentless march of time, are more than historical artifacts. They are living witnesses to the human quest for meaning, the courage to preserve knowledge, and the resilience of belief in the face of uncertainty. They remind us that secrets, once hidden, can endure to inspire wonder and provoke thought for generations. The enduring power of the scrolls lies not only in their content, but in the journey they have taken. Concealed by the Qumran community, forgotten in the sands, rediscovered by chance, and protected by meticulous guardianship. The scrolls embody a narrative of survival against all odds. Each fragment tells a story of human devotion, intellectual curiosity, and the audacity to question, interpret, and preserve. They challenge us to consider the fragility of memory and the weight of responsibility that comes with knowledge. Emotionally, the scrolls resonate deeply because they speak to universal human experiences: hope, doubt, fear, and courage. They show that even in exile, isolation, or danger, communities and individuals can create, reflect, and preserve meaning. The hymns, philosophical texts, and mystical visions reveal inner lives as rich and complex as any modern diary, confession, or reflection. The scrolls connect us across time, reminding us that the struggles, questions, and longings of ancient humans mirror our own. The scrolls also invite reflection on authority, truth, and interpretation. By preserving texts that were suppressed, edited, or omitted from canonical narratives, they expose the tension between human institutions and the pursuit of knowledge. What we accept as history or scripture is often shaped by decisions made in secrecy, by those with power, by those who decide which voices to elevate and which to silence. The scrolls encourage humility and curiosity, urging us to question, explore, and remain open to alternative perspectives. In their mystical and philosophical passages, the scrolls confront us with questions that transcend time. What is the nature of the divine? How do human actions resonate through eternity? How can we reconcile faith, morality, and knowledge in a complex world? These writings suggest that answers may not be absolute, but require reflection, courage, and engagement with the unknown. They challenge us to cultivate both intellect and intuition, blending curiosity with reverence for what lies beyond immediate understanding. Historically, the scrolls force us to reconsider familiar narratives. They hint at alternative histories, contested messianic expectations, and theological debates that were once vibrant but are now largely forgotten. By revealing what was suppressed, they illuminate the complexity of human belief, showing that faith, power, and interpretation are inseparable. The scrolls remind us that history is never simple or linear. It is a mosaic of perspectives, struggles, and choices, shaped as much by what is hidden as by what is recorded. The rediscovery and preservation of the scrolls also offer lessons about human responsibility. Guardians, scholars, and caretakers risk careers, reputations, and even safety to ensure that these texts endured. Their work demonstrates the ethical imperative to protect knowledge, treat it with respect, and engage with it thoughtfully. In an age of rapid information and fleeting memory, the scrolls remind us that some truths require patience, care, and reverence to survive. Ultimately, the Dead Sea Scrolls ask us to contemplate the intersection of secrecy, revelation, and human destiny. They suggest that hidden knowledge, once uncovered, can transform understanding and spark reflection. The texts are at once historical, spiritual, and deeply human, offering insight into the minds, hearts, and souls of those who created, preserved, and interpreted them. They inspire awe, curiosity, and humility, challenging us to consider the unseen forces that shape belief, culture, and identity. As we close this journey through desert caves, hidden hymns, mystical visions, and contested histories, one truth emerges. The Dead Sea Scrolls are more than relics of the past. They are reminders of the enduring human pursuit of meaning, the courage to preserve truth, and the wonder that arises when secrets hidden for millennia finally meet the light. They leave us with a subtle, persistent question. What if the knowledge we have yet to uncover today changes how we see ourselves, our history, or our place in the universe? In the end, the scrolls do not offer simple answers. They offer reflection, insight, and invitation. They remind us that history, faith, and knowledge are living, evolving, and deeply intertwined. By honoring their preservation, exploring their mysteries, and contemplating their implications, We participate in the same quest that began thousands of years ago in the caves near the Dead Sea. And in that participation, we become, in a sense, guardians ourselves, entrusted with secrets that continue to shape the human story.